Occasion to declare interest, and please switch off your mobile phone and turn your tablet to mute, and which I shall do. Yep, and today's business, we have two briefings, members, on bus operator licensing. Then first from the Rural Community Transport Partnerships at the Cahill and I were in for a few minutes last month or month before, and coming back. So and then after that, the departmental officials will be talking to us about it too. So that's going to be quite handy that we have one group after the other. Apologies from Barry McAduff. Any other apologies, members?
Sorry, Barry will be in 11 o'clock.
Okay, right. He's only going to be a bit late then. And just to maybe let members know that Barry McAduff's mother-in-law...
Despite all the tutsies, still be in 11 o'clock.
Barry McAduff's mother-in-law has recently passed away.
Yeah, true.
Okay. What do we normally do? Do we send a letter usually of condolence? Okay. Okay, so members, are you content if we send a letter of condolence to Barry? Okay, thank you. Yep. Chairperson's business, nothing very much, just maybe a quick recap of last week for those members who didn't go to Scotland with ourselves. It was a very worthwhile trip. We met with the Minister for Environment. We went to Edinburgh, a borough in Edinburgh, and they have this lovely community hub type post office and library and the council offices all in one. Was really kind of like a one-stop shop for ratepayers to be there, and encouraging participation and all that. Was very, very good. And then we went to Dundee as well, and so the massive regeneration plan for the seafront, really very inspiring. I want to go back in 3 years' time and see what it's like, what it will be like in 3 years' time, certainly. And they certainly have done an awful lot in engaging with the community in developing their community plan, and they are also doing it at the same time with land planning as well, land use planning as well as community planning. So we certainly learned a lot, and I thought it was really useful. The head of the community planning division in the department came with us, and so I think she took away quite a lot as well, and also a lot of contacts for her to follow up if she wants to in future. So you never know, we may bring some of them back for them to meet you or again maybe, and it was very good. And I really want to pay a huge tribute to Dr. Deborah Peel, who stayed with us the 2.5 days and took us everywhere, organised together with Neil lots of very, very useful contact, lots of very useful places for us to visit. So really, I think we should write a thank you letter for it as well.
Right,
and just to say how much we appreciated her input into the 3 days, making it a great success. And it's all her own time, and to spend with us. It's a lovely person as well to work with, very passionate about community planning. So, and she's connection with Northern Ireland as well. She taught in University of Ulster for 5 years. So she has that great understanding about Northern Ireland and the Scotland workings as well. So, okay, if we sent her a thank you letter and draft minutes, members.
I just wanted to say, Chair, just a special thanks to our own staff, because it really was terribly well organised and came together very, very, very well. There was a great sense of energy in Scotland, what they're doing there. It is really very, very impressive. And I think it was very, very helpful from that point of view.
Very much so. I certainly, yes, I agree with the Rob, and thank you to Lady. I should have said that too, formally, to all the staff too who came with us, and Neil and Sheila, making the journey really very smooth and yeah.
Flawless, flawless.
Flawless, absolutely. And thank you. Okay, draft minutes. Members content to approve the minutes? Content?
Yep, great.
Okay, thank you. Matters arising, item number 4. Members, at page 11. Item 1, the departmental reply regarding taxi signs. Oh, members, yes, just to say, a tabled paper there in front of you. Just a cover note on matters arising. For some reason, didn't get included in the pack, but it's in front of you as a tabled paper.
Teacher around the house.
Item 4.1 as departmental reply regarding taxi signs. The committee had asked the department for comments on correspondence from the North West taxi proprietors. The department says that reflecting current market conditions and the other costs that the department will be placing on the industry, it is proposed that the minimum requirement for a roof sign will be 125 millimetres. It's not really that big. Is that 100?
The height of it.
The height. Oh, okay. The height. Okay. So it's right
5
across
inches.
the top, I presume. Yeah.
5 inches
Yes.
no, money.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. And so it will be 125 millimetre in height, as asked for then by the North West taxi proprietors. So, members, any comments on this? Are you content to know?
Okay.
Content? Yeah.
Yeah.
I certainly welcome the understanding, I think, of the department that the industry certainly is facing a lot of changes. 4.2 at page 13. Oh, sorry, members. Are you content then if we forward a copy of the departmental reply to the North West taxis?
Yes.
Okay. Yep, thank you. Next item is 4.2. Page 13, members, and it's a departmental and that replies regarding impact of CAP reform on planning policy. We asked the department for comment on the impact of CAP and on land use planning, particularly rural dwellings. The department's understanding is that the CAP reform measures could include a new definition of an active farmer, which may impact upon the operation of policy. The Minister has written to the DAD Minister requesting further detail on these proposals and the likely timescales for implementing any such change. Officials will be able to consider what impact, if any, these reform measures may have upon the operation of the Department's planning policy for dwellings on farms once the response is received. Members, any comment on this, or we wait until the Department comes back to us in the future?
Yes.
Content with that, members?
Great job.
Next item, 4.3, is the Belfast City Council reply regarding examples of call-in at page 16. The Council has provided examples of decisions which may give rise to a call-in as requested by the Department at the meeting on the 23rd of January. That's at page 16, members. I actually missed that last night. I didn't read that.
Was there on the annex just attached there?
Okay.
I'm just reading. I know, yeah.
Okay, members,
Like the fine.
any issues arising from the response from the council?
Chair, I think it's a useful piece of information in the wider context of what we're doing. I suppose the only issue a little bit is, I mean, I think the idea whenever it comes to regulations, ideally should be drafted in such a way that to say essentially what would be a call-in. I suppose they're coming from a slightly different angle of saying here is a list of grounds which wouldn't qualify as a call-in type of thing, you know. But nevertheless, I think it's a useful contribution to the debate.
Yeah. Members, you happy if we forward this to the department as well? To let them have a read? Okay, thank you. Next item 4.4, departmental reply regarding capacity building and training for the local government code of conduct, and that's at page 18. Members, we asked a paper on the capacity building and training that will accompany the introduction of the Code of Conduct. A copy of the paper is included in members' meeting papers. I want to thank the department too. It's very detailed response to this. So, members, any comments on that? I was just wondering. It says there Tier 3 DOE themselves is going to do training on planning issues. So I mean that's actually very good. Obviously, quite natural for them to do it. I just wonder, who's doing this, and is it going to be the town planner managers, or have they got time to do it, and how is it going to be spread out? And,
Chair, it mightn't do any harm then if a letter went back just to follow up.
Yeah.
Just to tease out some of that detail.
yeah.
Maybe, to be fair, I don't know how much that's 100% decided, but it'd be useful to know.
Yeah, just want to know a bit more about it, and but certainly I want to thank them for a very detailed explanation about the capacity building program. Okay, members, any queries on that? Okay, we'll move on. Next item is page 22, members. We forward a copy of the NIA report on sickness absence in the public sector to the department for their comment. The reply states that the latest monthly information reports from January 2014 show that based on current statistics, the department will not meet in performance targets for 2013 to 14. The department carried out a workplace stress risk assessment survey earlier in 2013 and hopes that by addressing the issues arising from this survey, that this will contribute to a reduction in this category of sickness absence. Members, any comment on this?
Chair, just in relation to sickness absence, it does appear that long-term sickness is at quite a high level, and I just wonder why that is the position. Of course, long-term sickness absence tends to distort the overall average absence.
Yes.
An average is a very bad measure of anything because it's not a real measurement. It just would be interesting to know why why long-term sickness is such a problem. And I'm just wondering, if you abstracted that from the overall figures, would the normal absences, if I could call it that, would they be reasonable? I'm not certain from the figures here.
Yeah.
Sure. The other issue was just in relation to this. I mean, this was touched on yesterday by the DFP committee. I just wondered, and this goes wider than the DOE on it, but to what extent it seemed if different departments and different bodies would sort of varying rates depending upon what the job is of sickness absence, and I take on board what Alban said as well. And I see sort of there's talk about frameworks which manage sickness absence and that type of thing. I wonder if we're going to drill down a wee bit more to ask, to what extent the DOE and others look for best practice and share best practice. Because the other factor as well is, well, there seems to be a framework, for example, within the government departments, which can then be applied. I mean, to what extent is either lessons learned or lessons given, for example, to local government? There's been wide variation in terms of levels of sickness absence, albeit, to be fair, because sometimes much smaller bodies of people, so consequently a small number can actually distort the figures quite a bit. But I just wonder if we can get a more general bit of what role or otherwise DOE is in learning best practice, but also maybe where it is applying best practice, spreading that within its various sort of institutions and bodies, and whether it's uniform within DOE, whether it's left to this planning service do something slightly different from what's happened in other parts of the DOE or whatever type of thing. I think that might be useful as well to know.
Yeah, I mean, they said they're carrying out this survey on stress assessment. So maybe ask them, what program will be flowing out of that assessment, all right, to assess the risk. So maybe ask them, is it going to be pastoral care on staff, or trying to reduce stress and part-time maybe arrangements, or how are they being helped to come back to work? And maybe what actions are they taking to do this?
I take your point, Chair. It does say, of course, that psychiatric stroke, psychological illness is the principal cause of absence. If that is the case, what and as Peter has said, the department is trying to manage sickness absence, but does that involve counselling for people who are suffering from psychiatric, psychological illnesses, which stress would be one? Because that would be a very important aspect of trying to manage absence. Yes,
and we have a duty of care to staff.
Oh, absolutely.
If it's work stress, then that the employer can be liable.
Yes, of course.
Well, so maybe we'll ask more questions on those members. You content with that? Okay. Yep. Next item is 4.6, email regarding DVA job losses, members. This email arrived after the committee meeting on the 20th of March had started. So the email suggests a way forward in the redevelopment process, deployment process for DVA staff. So members, you content if we forward the email to the department for their comment?
Great.
Okay. And next item, 4.7, departmental update on implementation of recommendations from the committee inquiry report into used tyre disposal, and that's at page 27. Again, I think I want to thank the department. We've got a quite detailed table there, members, at page 28. So highlight in green as the other departmental recommendations and what work is being done. So some progress, in terms of also enforcement staff and. Okay. Maybe just to stress that we want to be really informed of continued progress. Yes, that's right. I know, that's right. They have undertaken to give us 6 monthly update on the recommendations, and they're not only looking at recommendations from our report, but also their own departmental a work survey as well. So, yeah, good to see that progress is being made. So, members content? We moved on. Next item.
Right,
Okay, 4.8. Departmental reply regarding MCZ workshop report, and that's at page 38. We asked for a copy of the report following the briefing session on the 20th of March. The department states that this report is still being written and is due for publication on the 19th of April. A copy of the report will be forwarded to the committee when it's complete. So members content to note that?
Great.
Yep, thank you. 4.9 on page 39. Departmental reply regarding Institute of Acoustics Good Practice Guide on Wind Turbine Noise. We pass on correspondence from Windwatch on the Acoustics Good Practice Guide to the department for their comment. The department states that it does not agree with Windwatch that the minister's endorsement of the guide will further increase the noise communities are exposed to, or that it shows contempt for the committee's inquiry or residents living in proximity to wind turbines. The Minister has advised that he will fully consider the committee's inquiry report with an open mind and will take whatever action he considers appropriate as a result. Members, any comments on that, or are you content to forward a copy of the reply to Windwatch for their information, and also to include a reply in our inquiry report?
Great.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Next item, 4.10, page 41. This is a letter from Phonacab and Value Cabs regarding single-tier taxi licensing. The two taxi firms have presented the committee with a postcard campaign calling on members to support single-tier taxi licensing. Members, you have each a sample of them there in front of you. The postcards in yellow, different from different users. So, sorry, Peter, what did you say?
No. I was just slightly dubious about petition campaigns of description as to how much reliance can be put on some of them at times, but that's a general point.
Right. Well, I suddenly, but funny enough, I pick up the pack and they were all South Belfast addresses. I do recognise the addresses, so...
Any outside Belfast, do you reckon?
The South and East addresses, so just happened on the top of my pile. So, members, if we respond to them and just thank them for this, and
Yes.
yeah, well done. How many are there altogether? Several thousand.
4,200.
4,200 of them. So we
I
just
presume that we're just writing to Photocab and Value Cabs rather than writing to all 4,200.
Yes.
there are addresses there, but it's not our campaign, so we're not responsible to respond to anyone.
Chair,
So-
just through the chair on that matter, I don't mind responding to only cab, Valley Cab.
Sorry,
Could we have a wee update from the department in relation to the single tier system and when they're bringing forward or just the issues of Belfast?
We haven't.
Right.
Yes.
In the committee's position.
That's right. No, we're waiting for the minister to come back to us on that, although he
When
has
did
stated
when
that
did we
it's
have the meeting to discuss this?
I would have thought it was maybe 4 weeks back.
Right, and previous meeting we discussed this in 30 or 31 minutes.
immediately before Christmas. Before Christmas.
Right, so I'm just making a point. I mean, we're aware of that before Christmas. We're still waiting on the issue addressed to
Well,
Belfast.
The minister did state his petition to the committee in February, and then the committee subsequent to the department after that, stating the committee's position. That was it.
Well, that's grand. Chair. I mean, I'm mindful now of the time frame, and I mean, not that long till 3/6, so we need to see
Same handwriting.
table in relation to this matter. Thank
Different
you.
addresses.
Okay, okay, members. Then we moved on. Then
Oh, well.
members agree. We right back to the two taxi funds. Thank them for the postcards. Okay, thank you. Next item, number 5, page 43. And that's synopsis of responses to consultation on draft supplementary planning guidance and aerobic digestion to PBS 18. There were 8 responses to the consultation. All of these were broadly supportive, and work is now ongoing to finalise the document. Members, are you content for the department to advise the committee when the final version is published? Okay.
Chair, I'm sorry, Chair, because I never got my papers this morning. Just in relation to the responses, obviously there's a number of issues in relation to community response to this, individual communities responding to the likes of these issues. Is there anything in the responses itself said that most of them are predominantly in favour? Is there? Just take a minute. Because, I mean, I know a lot of the local communities have issues over them. Just wondering what responses were made. And
If you look on page 47,
okay.
there's a list of the people who
No,
responded.
that's grand, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
There's no indication there are community groups in there who actually responded.
That's I'm slightly concerned about.
Incorrectly. Password. The email I was opening.
That's the very reason, Chair. I'm just wondering. Well, then in that case,
Password for that.
can you clarify then from the department in relation to the responses? I can see the list of groups here, but clearly, I know that in my own area there's issues, some serious concerns within local communities in relation to some of the suggestions. Maybe you can clarify from the department whether or not any communities had contacted them or as part of the process. Did they consult with any community groups or in relation to this matter?
I think it's difficult for them to consult community groups.
Oh, no, Chair, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, we put these things out for consultation, and we gear towards certain groups of people, and then we find after the consultation is over that certain people haven't responded. So, we have a list of people there who did respond. You know, just could you clarify?
Yeah.
Because I mean, we'll bring out supplementary guidance here in relation to this matter, and then we'll find that once we introduce them in the first test case in terms of anaerobic digestion, maybe have a lobby to say that there's issues with it, just like we had with EPS 18 supplementary guidance.
25.
Maybe get more clarity from the department in terms of impact on communities. That's all I would like, please.
Members content with that? We'll right back.
Content.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think in terms of community response, generally communities don't respond to it unless they know there is maybe a
very
plant
point,
right
That's the
beside
very
them.
point. That's the very point.
So, yeah. Okay, members.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep, we moved on then. Next item, item number 6, page 64. And that one, a synopsis of responses to consultation on UNECE Regulation 129, Enhanced Child Restraint Systems. This was a UK-wide consultation on new child restraints, conforming to the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe Regulation 129. There were no responses from consultees in Northern Ireland, but all those who did respond expressed unanimous support for the proposed amendment. The Department proposes to proceed with transposition through amendments to 2 statutory rules as soon as is feasible, given that amendments to seatbelt legislation are by affirmative resolution requiring Assembly debate. This is likely to be after the summer recess. Members, are you content for the Department to proceed with making the rules? Content?
Chair, just want to know, I've no objection to any of this. I think it's proper that safety systems be looked at and that they be enhanced. I am concerned about the cost of to the ordinary citizen, and I can't see any reference to cost to the individual, because if you're going to enhance safety devices, etc., then
That'll be
Bound to
part
be.
of the SL1. The department has to give that information when they put
it
forward
will
an
do. Yeah.
SL1, telling you the estimated financial implications for the legislation.
Well, that I think that's important. You know, that people are aware of the financial impact on
When that comes back to us, then we will see that.
because I am concerned about young parents having to fork out money, additional monies, perhaps to remove present restraints that they have in vehicles and
Yes.
replacing them.
Yeah,
It's quite a burden.
Would be extra if
I
you have
think
a
it
couple of
was
children.
on
If I just-
manufacturers rather than
I
anything
would
else.
just stop here and welcome the young people who have just come in. And this is from Paxco. You're all very welcome. And this is the Environment Committee. We are at the moment looking at an issue about child restraint in cars. So this is kind of following EU direction on improving safety for children. Sorry, Alban.
I think Clark was indicating that the cost might be borne by the manufacturer. If that is the case, then I would be very happy with that. But the point I do make is that the cost of safety is borne by the consumer in most instances. And we're dealing with people with young families, maybe more than one child and so forth. So it's a considerable expense on a young family under sometimes quite difficult circumstances. So we have to bear that in mind when we're considering.
Very much, and then particularly if you have one child, you bought the old style one.
Yes,
And you know, normally you would pass on to the second child,
yes.
and but then if you have to buy a new one. So, Pam, you'd like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with Alban. Probably coming at this from a different angle. I know the department did have a very recent campaign about seatbelts and wearing of them. I'm just thinking it doesn't actually matter what safety regulations you bring in if actually people as an adults are not complying and actually adhering to those conditions and those regulations and those laws that actually built up. The amount of times that I see children, it's not the adults, the children not secured in the back of cars, it's horrendous. And you know, so no matter what modification of what type of you know, safety equipment you have in there, if it's not used, if they're not secured, because maybe adults don't actually sometimes like making their children do what they're supposed to do, it's going to be completely ineffective. So it might even be worth a note to the department to ask what they're doing to encourage parents really to make sure that their children are properly.
Of course, I mean it's against the law if you don't belt up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe more awareness raising campaign needs to be done.
Absolutely. It makes me quite angry actually to see adults who have built it themselves in and haven't done the same for their children.
Yeah, they're more at
They
risk.
probably think they're being soft on the children, but actually they're putting them in danger.
Yes, we can write to the department and ask that.
Thank you. And we moved on then to the next item, members. Where are we now? I think I moved on.
Number 7.
So we are on number 7, members. Yes. That's at page 70, members. It's the synopsis of responses to consultation on revised draft PBS 15, Planning and Flood Risk. Department consulted on the revised PBS 15 from the 10th of October 2013 to the 10th of January 2014 and received 27 responses. A synopsis of these responses is at page 74. Overall, there was a general consensus about the need for the existing PPS to be updated. Approximately half of the respondents indicated general or partial support for the document, and there were no responses which criticised the draft PPS as a whole. Work is now ongoing to finalise the document, taking account of the comments received before seeking executive agreement to publish the final versions. Members should contend for the department to advise the committee when the final version is ready, is published. Okay. Members contend with that? We moved on. Item number 8, page 95, synopsis of responses to consultation on EC regulation on bus and coach passenger rights. Department, together with DRD and DETI, consulted on the implementation of this regulation. There were responses from Translink, the Consumer Council and the Inclusive Mobility and Transport Advisory Committee, IMTAC, and these were broadly supportive. It's the department's intention for the 3 departments jointly to develop guidance in relation to enforcement procedures and procedures for dealing with complaints before putting forward a final policy position to the Executive for approval. This will be followed by NSL 1 to the committee in due course. So, members, you content for the department to proceed with making the policy?
Content.
Okay, thank you. Next item then is item number 9, page 111, discussion document on environmental legislation, and is regarding dilapidated and dangerous buildings and neglected sites. The aim of the discussion document is to obtain detailed feedback from key stakeholders about the effectiveness or otherwise of the complex legislative framework available to district councils to address dilapidated or dangerous buildings and neglected sites. The closing date for responses is the 30th of June this year, and this is not a formal consultation exercise at this stage. Depending on the feedback received to the discussion document, the department will, if appropriate, consider bringing forward firm legislative proposals for full formal consultation. Members, are you content to request a copy of the synopsis of responses at the end of that consultation period?
Chair,
Okay.
I think, Chair, this is a welcome move. I think there's a lot of issues
Yeah.
out there. I think
Absolutely.
it's a welcome
Yeah.
move.
Yeah, thank you. We'll most certainly welcome that. Next item, members, is our briefing today from the Rural Community Transport Partnership on bus operator licensing. As I said, we very briefly, Carl and I, met with, and Pam, you did too, I think you did too, met with a number of people from. Good morning, you're all very welcome. Anita Flanagan is from the Fermanagh Community Transport, Billy Moore is from the North Coast Community Transport, and Patty McOdani is from the EC Link Community Transport. And thank you very much for coming. It's a long way for you to come to Stormont too, and I just mentioned that we met with you very briefly, and unfortunately I think it was a very busy day for MLAs, and we were only able to come in and out and had only a few minutes really with each of you. So members, there also a briefing paper. Yes, I said that soon. There's a briefing paper, members, for you at page 114 from the partnerships. So maybe if you can give us 5-10 minutes of a briefing and then to answer questions from members. Members already had your briefing paper in their pack.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to update the committee on our concerns on the current DOE licensing proposals. We represent 11 rural community transport partnerships. Those are listed in your briefing paper. I'm not going to list them out. All of the organisations were set up as not-for-profit charities by members of our local communities for the purposes of providing access to services, affordable and accessible services in our local communities, particularly identifying the most isolated and vulnerable in our society. We work very closely within the aims of the Rural Transport Fund, which is the DRD fund that we operate under. The Rural Transport Fund aims are to target social need by improving rural people's access to training or employment opportunities, complement the work of other agencies involved in development of rural communities, support a wide range of community-based activities and have a broad base of community support, and we encourage volunteering activity. As well as that information, there's a lot of background and setting the scene information there. I'm not going to go through it all. I assume you've all read it, so I'm not going to take up your time. I'm going to hand over to some of my colleagues here who will go through the concerns on the proposals.
I'm going to just go through the issues and concerns that we have with the current licensing proposals. They are listed, but if I can try and explain them a wee bit. The first point is that if the rural community transport partnerships are placed within the full bus operator licensing category of the proposed two-tier regime, we feel that there will be growing pressure on DRD to tender the dial lift services that we're providing, that are currently being grant funded by the department since 1998. Now, the issue we have with that is that if the DRD tender the dial lift transport service, it will only allow for licensed vehicles to deliver the service, which is a licensed minibus or a taxi, with no opportunity to avail of the volunteer car schemes that we operate across Northern Ireland. We're currently delivering about 30% of the dial lift service using volunteer cars within our local areas. The knock-on effect of that is if the volunteering is excluded from the delivery of the Rural Transport Fund services, this will result in the cost of providing a similar level of service and quality to increase substantially, or if the budget is fixed, it will mean then that there's a significant reduction in the level and quality of the service to the isolated and vulnerable clients. The other then couple of points to finish with is that from a road safety perspective, there's a concern from within our sector about the high number of buses in Northern Ireland which have neither a licence or are subject to the 10B permit that we operate under. So this is an area where, if road safety is of paramount importance, there's work to be done there to tidy up the sector currently, regardless of the new proposals. And then the last one is that the rural community transport partnerships are a bit concerned about what we see as maybe the unfair suggestion that we're obstructing or any change or progress in the licensing review because we don't want to adhere to any additional road safety requirements such as the vehicle maintenance and testing, professional competence, financial standing or good repute. Our concerns are not about any of that additional requirements that might be brought upon us. It's more those first 3 or 4 points about how it affects our clients and our ability to serve them. And I suppose just to finish then, we'd be very keen to hear the Department's views on these concerns that we're raising. I'll pass you over now to Billy. He's going to take you through the next couple of points.
Yes, just the progress to date. There has been regular engagement with DOE officials, and we have representation on the bus forum. It's actually Paddy that sits on the bus forum for us. There's a positive working relationship developed between the partnerships and the DOE officials, and I do believe that there is a much better understanding of each other's position. There's a lot of common ground and agreement that has been achieved. I think we agree almost with everything. The only thing is about where we lie within the licence, and we believe that we don't lie within the full tier, the full operator's licence. And I think if we had that ironed out, I think that's the only outstanding issue. increasing engagement with DVA enforcement regarding operating within the 10B permit. We've had visits from DVA officials into our office, and I would welcome them back again. I did actually welcome them that day and said that we would welcome any advice. If we have to adhere to any other standards or whatever, come advise us and we will put anything in place. We believe that we're there anyway. Really, the conclusions, we agree that the bus licensing needs updated and modernised. We believe within that we fit within the own accounts licence at this moment in time. We agree that road safety is of paramount importance, and as we have said, we are willing to work with DOE officials on that. I think, as I said, we are there. We believe that because we are a government-funded body, that we have to make sure that, or the DRD makes sure that we have everything in place, or they wouldn't be funding us. And the main priority for the partnerships, and this goes beyond transport really, but our main priority is the vulnerable and isolated rural clients that we serve across Northern Ireland. And for instance, if I could just give you one example of in the North Coast area, because we can use volunteers at this moment in time, we have 20 minibuses and we have 40 volunteers. That gives us 60 options to deliver transport at any one time, which means we don't have to refuse any of the vulnerable clients that try to book a trip. If, for instance, the licensing went the way that we wish that it wouldn't go, what would happen is we would lose those 40 volunteers, drop down to 20 options, and therefore there would be a lot of people who refuse their trips and wouldn't get them.
Yeah, we have a number of recommendations that we feel would be useful. We feel, for the reasons outlined regarding safeguarding the essential services we provide to our members, that we should not sit within the full operator licence. Within the current two-tier proposals, we feel we should sit within the own account licence, along with the many other community-based groups or organisations who currently operate under the 10B permit regime, for example luncheon clubs, youth groups, churches, etc., who operate their own minibuses. We are very keen to work with DOE and DVA immediately to look and review and update the 10B permit, because there are some road safety concerns, and we are quite happy to meet any standards that the DOE and DVA want to enforce. As Paddy highlighted, we feel that the DVA enforcement should do more to determine the status and legality of the 2,911 buses in Northern Ireland that currently are not licensed or operating under a 10B permit. We feel that the relevant DOE and DRD officials need to engage urgently to ensure that any changes to bus licensing does not have a negative impact on the most vulnerable in our communities. And we feel the DOE should engage with other departments to ensure that any licensing proposals do not adversely affect other departments trying to achieve their strategies or policies. For example, the DSD volunteering strategy, the DARD Rural White Paper, OFM DFM's Active Agent Strategy, and DHSSPS Transforming Your Care, just to name a few. I'm aware that the department officials are here, and I'm interested to hear what their views are on the recommendations. I think we'll leave it there, and we'll open up the floor to questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Certainly, I recall the one of the problems I think of excluding you into. I think it was about commercialism or something like that. Of that you, as a EU issue, about if you are not going to be. I'm not explaining very clearly, but I'm trying to remember what it was. It's about EU law that if you operate the way you are, then you must be categorised as operating as a commercial entity. But you have a mention in that. I think that has been explained to us previously.
Yeah, there is a question over whether we are commercial or not under EU legislation. Because we charge our passengers a fare, we provide a subsidised service, heavily subsidised by the department. We do charge the passengers a nominal fare. We don't see that as commercial. We operate as not-for-profit charities. I know the DOE officials have got some solicitor's advice. We'd be interested to see that advice, but we haven't been made privy to it as yet. But as far as we're concerned, we wouldn't see ourselves as commercial in any way, shape or form. Any income that we receive from our members goes straight back into the organisation to try and support the services we provide on the ground. Are you happy with that?
Okay, so you're saying you're not for profit, and so thereby you should not be classified as commercial entity.
Yeah.
And sorry, just to add, there are many other community-based organisations out there that have one or two minibuses, and would collect a fare. For example, the local luncheon club in Strabane, where I operate, they have one bus. They take people into their luncheon club. They charge them £3 for their dinner and £1 for the bus. So does that mean that that vehicle has to move within the full operator's licence? So this notion that, if there's £1 changes hands, it's automatically commercial. For us, I mean, our trips cost £12, £13, £14, £15 to deliver, and we're charging a fare of £2 or £3. It's not even break even. It's just a nominal fare to help add to the pot to deliver more service, and it's in no way, in our opinion, we would feel very strongly that it in no way could it be considered commercial. But the legal opinion that DOE have sought suggests that if a penny changes hands, then automatically your class is commercial, which would be our concern.
Yes. I mean, how do we get over that?
We feel very strongly that we sit within the own account licence. So if we sit within the own account licence, we are licensed. We have to meet the requirements of the licence, but it allows us to operate as a charity, as a community-based organisation, where our core reason for being is, alleviating that isolation and social exclusion, as opposed to just being labelled primarily as transport provider.
Yes. So your concern is then if the DRD, if it's going to be kind of open to the market to tender or to go for tendering for the dial lift service, then you may not get it. But then would that mean then will there still be a grant for that service?
No, if that service went to tender and it was opened up to the market, we would all sort of bid for the work. We may win it. But even if we won the tender, we wouldn't be able to deliver the service that we deliver currently. As Paddy outlined, we currently use a lot of volunteers using their own cars. If we tendered for the service, we'd only be able to use taxis or licensed minibuses, so we would lose the volunteering aspect.
And why is it you can't use volunteers?
Because the service would be tendered on a licensed vehicle, and volunteer cars wouldn't be classed as a licensed vehicle. I'll just give you an example in my area. I have a lot of members who live in the Garrison area, which is 30 miles from our office. The local health centre is 5 miles down the road. We have a couple of volunteers that live in that area. They pick up the passenger, take them to the health centre, wait while they're there, bring them home again, maybe stop at the post office, do their shopping, go for a cup of coffee and take them home again. If we won the tender and we were sending a taxi or a minibus, we couldn't afford to send a taxi or a minibus down the road 30 mile and 30 mile back, and we wouldn't have the same resources available to deliver the service.
Okay, so the cost to the consumer will really rise an awful lot more.
Well, the cost of the department would rise, I would think, considerably. Either the cost of the department would rise or the service would be reduced dramatically.
But then the department would not need to give out grants, then, would they? They still will give out this grant, though. You're talking about that you've been receiving for some time.
The assumption is that they'll replace it from being a grant-funded service to a tendered service. So the grant will disappear, be replaced with the tender, and then it will be bid for. The one or losing of the tender is not the point we're trying to make, of whether we're delivering in the future or not. What we're trying to stress is that no matter who wins that future bid, they'll only be able to deliver it using licensed vehicles, which excludes our volunteer car scheme, which means the service suffers dramatically. So it's not about the winning or losing of the tender.
Currently in Northern Ireland, we have throughout Northern Ireland we have 210 volunteers who are helping us deliver our services. Last year, April 12 to March 13, for the dial-up service, they delivered over 62,000 passenger trips. All that would be lost because the volunteers would...
So the service will still be subsidised, but your concern is then you'll be losing all the volunteers and who currently work with you and provide kind of free service in a way.
Yeah, and the most
they get mileage expenses.
And the most isolated and vulnerable in the communities, the furthest away from the bases or whoever wins the tender will be the people who will suffer the most. Again, those are the people who will become even more isolated and more excluded because they won't be able to access health appointments, go to the shops, go to the banks, the hairdressers or whatever it is to use transport for.
Those who need the service most will be the ones that will lose out, and that's the big concern.
Okay. And how it works now is that people then, your members ring you up and ask for a taxi. Okay. I'll let other members come in. Pam?
I hadn't indicated, Chair, but...
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh, that was a previous, but no. Colin.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Chair. It might not be a question for you. So you get grant funding, and they're telling you that you're in a commercial operation. Is that was the advice that you got?
The new licensing proposals are taken into consider the European guidelines, and the legal opinion is that we would need to move to the full operator's licence, the same as the commercial bus companies. And for that reason, then DRD couldn't. We don't think they'll be able to continue to grant fund us if we're in the same licence as the rest of the private sector.
Yeah, well, you see, if they're grant funding you now, and if they're saying that you're a commercial operation, then there's issues around European state aid and stuff, you'd imagine, that would be a concern. So you're either a volunteer organisation that's providing a necessary service, or you're a commercial operation that's competing with other operations. My view, without having any legal advice on it, is that you probably are just a community organisation trying to provide a service. And if the government are saying that they're going to grant fund you, which they have been for however many number of years, they've accepted you're not a commercial operation. Because if you were, them giving you money would create a European issue around state aid, I would imagine. But it's a question we need to ask the department.
Well, we feel very strongly.
I'm not putting you on the spot.
No, but I mean, we feel very strongly that we are a charity, a community-based organisation, and providing a service for those who need it. So that's entirely where we think we should be, and there is room for that within the new licensing regime. It's called the own account licence. Yeah. So we're still licensed, we're still sort of watched, we're still, somebody can enforce the law on us, but we're within a tier of the licence that allows us to continue to be a charity, a community-based organisation, and continue to receive grant funding.
And just to expand on that a little bit, one of the organisations that recently went through the charity legislation in Northern Ireland, there was 10 organisations picked to test the new charity commission, and one of them was a community transport organisation in Lisburn. They were successful in becoming one of the first Northern Ireland charities. So the charity commission are happy that we operate as charities. So that would take away that question of commerciality, as far as we're concerned.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Cahill?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks once again for your presentation. Obviously, I took the opportunity to make this a number of weeks back. Just a couple of points, and clearly I'm glad the department's here, and most of the questions will be geared towards them or some of the comments you've made already. I'm fairly supportive of what work you do, because representing a large rural area, them isolated pockets, and not, people are left there isolated and not getting the service, and you provide that service. And I would have fears if we go down this route, and that level of service will not continue. So I welcome the work you're doing. I also remember when we were in DRD, went through this process. When I was in the DRD committee the last time, we were asking about public transport and how they service the rural areas, and clearly they could not do that. So we welcome the work you're doing. But just want to ask just a couple of points really in terms of clearly there's possibly a road safety issues that's been brought up by the legislation. Could you comment on anything you've done in relation to that, or deal with the department in negating any of them issues or concerns that the department has? And in terms of the provision of service that you do, what would be the consequences if we're introducing it down the commercial route in relation to yourselves? What's the consequences on the impact on rural communities in relation to that?
I'll just cover the road safety one, maybe. We've been working very closely with DRD, who monitor our who grant fund us, and who set in our terms and conditions. And we operate that. In our terms and conditions, we have to meet certain standards: driver training, maintenance schedules, bus safety. We're very keen that passenger safety is our priority, and we work very closely with each other, even and the department, and even DVA, to ensure that our vehicles are safe. Most of the community transport partnerships have had a visit from DVA enforcement in recent months. We were happy to have them, because, again, as Billy said, if we're not doing something right, we'd like them to flag it up. Thankfully, they haven't flagged any issues up, so we must be doing everything as we're supposed to be. I know they spent I think it was an hour and a half in my office one day when I wasn't there, and they went through rigorous checks and paperwork to try. I think they were trying to find an issue, and they couldn't. They left quite happily. So I was very content as the manager of the organisation to know that DVA enforcement left with no issues within our organisation. Again, we have a high standard of maintenance. We make sure our vehicles are fully maintained and to a high standard at all times. Have you anything you want to add to that?
I think you've covered it. Probably you asked also
on the
impact. The impact we sort of touched on, in a sense, in that if, for instance, went to tender and we were to lose out in the volunteer car scheme, I could just read you out the figures from 2012-13. Volunteer cars covered 917,000 miles on that year, over 62,000 passenger trips, and over 63,000 voluntary hours given to community transport. What that actually means is that, again, we have no refusals. We all are working above our business plans to the ERD. We try to deliver more for less. That's why we engage with volunteers. Government also wants us to engage with volunteers. There's a lot of government strategies that promote volunteering. That's why we go down the volunteering route. And without the volunteers, the numbers of people getting transport to essential services, that's why I believe this goes beyond transport. This goes right into the heart of our community, and we're there to meet community needs. It's more than transport. I have sympathies with the private operators. They need to operate. They need to make a living. I don't think this is like a specialised type service. I believe that should remain with community transport. We go back to the 2,900 vehicles that are on licence or don't have a permit, and you go back to maybe rogue operators on the road. And I think if that was addressed, then maybe the private operators, the genuine private operators, would actually have more work, and therefore maybe this situation wouldn't be highlighted.
And just so the last point on the effect on the clients, the fact is very clear as well that the demand for our service is increasing. The ageing population, and particularly things like Transform Your Care, when sort of health-related transport is increasingly sort of being pushed our way, that only puts added pressure on the limited resource we have. So we have to make the very best use of every single pound. And our concern is if we don't have the capacity of those volunteers, then even to just sit still will be difficult. But the demand just keeps coming and coming. So the long term, it's going to be even more difficult to meet that demand.
Can I just make one more point? As well as the dial-a-lift service that we provide, we also provide other services that integrate with the dial-a-lift. On the back of the fact that we're grant funded to provide that service, we also provide a community group hire service, and a number of community organisations in our areas wouldn't be able to deliver services to older people, disabled groups in the area. We're currently carrying out a social return on investment report across Northern Ireland on the community transport services we provide, and some of the focus groups that we've had, the community organisations are coming back very clearly stating that they wouldn't be able to provide any services in our areas if we weren't available.
But just finally, Chair, there's one point I want to pick up on, because obviously through the home care package and all, Home Help used to do a lot of work for the people, maybe run down and do a wee bit extra service. Now, I know it's not their job, but they did do it. But because of the changes in the care package and the payments now, a lot of the elderly people couldn't get support that way, so you're covering that gap as well. I take it that's increasing as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we're finding that decisions made in other departments, particularly health, to be honest, is affecting the demand in our services. Services that they would have provided before, that they, transport to daycare, stuff like this, or the home health domiciliary care type work, as they sort of reduce their commitment to that, then just automatically the social workers ringing us saying, "Can you now help them? Can you now take them?" And there's just added pressure on us to pick up that tab all the time.
Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Tom?
Chair, thank you. Sorry for missing your presentation, so if you've answered my question, please forgive me. But I note that you have indicated in your briefing that the DOE should engage with other departments to ensure any licensing proposals do not adversely affect these departments achieving their strategies or policies, and you go on to list the policies. Have you put any definitive proposals to the department about managing the process so that obviously your organisations are continued to provide that community service?
Well, in our list of recommendations there, Tom, at the end, you will see these are what we suggest the department should do. Basically put us in the own account licence and maybe an upper tier of that, so that we continue to provide the services we provide under grant funding. We think that's key to be able to continue to provide the services we provide in the communities and not affect any other government strategies.
Have you held discussions, Anita, with the department on that specific issue?
We've discussed the proposals in depth with the department.
Have they given you any indication if they can?
I think it would be fair to say at this point that this is why we think that the department should engage and discuss the matter, because at times we feel maybe that the DRD could be waiting on the outcome of the licensing, which would maybe dictate the direction that they go, which is why we're sitting here worried about the outcome of the licensing, because if that comes in our favour the way we believe that it should, then the discussion would turn to the DRD, and we would be asking a question of the DRD: where do they go from here?
Yeah, so one's waiting on the other. It's the circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to get to the crux of the matter, that there has been no definitive response to your suggestions from the department.
The bus forum is the avenue that we're communicating with at the minute. I represent the partnerships on the bus forum. So we are there giving our opinion, giving our tuppence worth, and there's quite a few stakeholders around the table. So, but I mean, in my opinion, the relationship between the partnerships and the officials, the DOE officials, has improved over time, particularly over the last 18 months, where we are meeting there's been 2 or 3 one-to-one meetings between us and our representatives and the DOE officials. So there's no issue there where we're not talking to the right people or we're not getting the meetings. That's all happening. But there's 2 angles to it. There's how we're communicating with DOE and their proposals and giving our opinion as we go along. And I think they're being taken on board, to be fair to the officials. But then there's this other big debate about our relationship with DRD and the DOE licensing people's relationship with the DRD and what their plans are. DRD policy is really central to this. And now we're talking to DRD policy. The DOE officials are talking to DRD. So there's a bit of a three-way discussion going on there, and it's difficult to navigate around that. Yeah. But we're certainly not being excluded from any discussions. We are being listened to.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and maybe we'll have to ask officials about the relationship between DRD and themselves and who's in control of that process. But my main point is, and I don't think I've got a direct answer, I've got it in a roundabout way, has there been any direct indication from DOE if they're able to allow you to sit outside that full operator licence?
Their official opinion back in November, the bus forum, was that categorically no, you will be in the full licence. Now, since then, there may have been a bit of a dilution of that. It's maybe not as definitive. So, at a stage, we were told you're definitely full licence, and the legal opinion dictates, and that's a done deal. But between November and now, the question is still there: where do we put the rural community transport partnership? So I think there's been a softening in that opinion. To be fair,
you just need a softened board.
Yeah, we'll let you ask them that question.
Well, departmental officials are going to be immediately after your presentation, so we'll have a lot of those questions to put forward to them. Yeah. Alban, would you like to come?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I don't represent a rural constituency, but I'm very impressed by what I've learned about the service that you provide, and I think that it's posited on the idea of ending social exclusion to promote social inclusion in remote rural areas, and I think that's a very important social benefit. And I say that not just by way of introduction, but I say that because it seems to me that is the measure of your service. And I cannot understand how EU legislation, it seems to me that this is what it's all about. I could not conceive of EU legislation being strictly based purely on commercial considerations. There must be some element of social good, public good, a contribution in terms of a social value that the service that you provide gives to the whole community. And my question really would be, have you yourselves sought legal opinion in relation to the position that the department has indicated? Because that I think would be of great benefit in terms of your argument.
You offering your services, Alvin?
We'll chip in.
I'm North Belfast.
The sort of health warning, I know nothing about this particular aspect of European law, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't some sort of exemption.
I think we would feel that in any legal opinion there's always another opinion. Unfortunately, we don't have a departmental solicitor's office in each of our charities, and collectively we have considered it. We've looked at how we might go about that,
yes.
how much it might cost. The problem we have is we go through the full process of getting a full barrister's opinion. It could end up costing us an absolute fortune, and we're a wee bit snookered on how we could get that opinion on our behalf at a reasonable cost. So we have considered. We know that it's an option that's open to us. The problem we have is that collectively, could we afford that opinion? That's the wee bit of the corner we're in now.
But your point raised, Mr. McGuinness, is a very good one, because we've often thought, exactly as you have mentioned, that surely within any legislation there has to be something. If we're meeting a social need for the most vulnerable and isolated people in our communities, surely there has to be something in there. And if there's not, then why isn't there? Why is there not changed so that there is something in there for them?
Yes, I must say I'd be very surprised if there wasn't some consideration of that within EU legislation or EU policy in relation to this type of area that we're discussing.
And again, we're very reluctant to take resources from frontline services to our local communities and use them to get legal advice, because, as Paddy said, the cost is extortionate.
Well, I'll leave that to your good selves to do research.
But we would be happy to take on your services. Pro bono, isn't that what
Free
they call it?
service.
Pro bono, yeah.
On a not-for-profit basis.
No, free is the word. Free.
Yeah.
That's very
Yeah.
flattering.
You
Anyway,
offer an opinion.
One final point, just in relation to the it's a very interesting scheme. You use minibuses as well as volunteer cars. The volunteer cars, that certainly would concern me. That how can you ensure proper standards right across a range of volunteer cars, and perhaps even the competence of drivers? I know that obviously a person would need a licence and so forth, but there are certain standards that must be enforced because you're providing what is essentially a public service. How do you ensure that?
We do rigorous checks with our volunteers. We do our access and eye checks, first of all.
Yeah.
We get copies of MOT, insurance, tax, and all the checks to make sure that the vehicles are up to high standard. We put all our drivers through what we call Karen MPV MIDAS training. So we take them through all the theory and the legal requirements about being a driver, the safety aspects, customer care, how to deal with passengers with disabilities, and then we do an on-the-road observation with them. In our organisation, we've actually went one step further now, and we got funding through PCSP, and we're actually putting the drivers through, we're taking a driving instructor and taking them out, each of them out for an hour on the road, just to get a report from the driving instructor to ensure that the driving instructor feels that they're safe for driving. We have no issues with them. Our driver assessor trainer takes each driver out individually to make sure, the same as the minibus drivers, to make sure that they're safe, that if the driver assessor is happy that they're a safe driver, then we're happy to let them carry our passengers. We're not just going to let any Tom, Dick or Harry take our passengers out without any training or checks. You know, we want to make sure, as I say, passenger safety is our priority. These are our members, these are our community. We want to make sure everybody's safe.
That's very, very impressive, Chairperson.
And all that training is accredited through the Community Transport Association, which is a UK-wide organisation. So the training that we deliver is accredited training through the Community Transport Association. So it's recognised throughout the UK.
Could I just stop you there? If this is a UK-wide scheme, or there are other schemes similar to this in the UK. Surely they would also have encountered similar legal problems. Have you consulted with your colleagues across the water in relation to this particular problem?
This debate has been running for 4, 5, 6 years, and the community transport sector throughout the UK have been under a bit of pressure. There's this ongoing to and fro between the sort of private bus sector and the community transport sector throughout the UK as to what work the community transport sector can and can't do, and how it's delivered versus what the private bus sector can and can't do.
But could I just stop you there? I mean, really, private sector could not perform this service. This is a discrete service in the main.
Specialised service.
Yes, this is a specialised service. I mean, you would be charging a fortune to carry this out privately.
And so, just following on then, this debate about the licensing, GB, to be honest, are not. This is one I think you should ask Ian about in particular, and he probably not mind me suggesting that. But the GB are not as far down the line as Northern Ireland are with regard to imposing these changes on the community sector. They seem to be allowing the community voluntary sector to continue doing what they're doing. Now, whether that just means it's a time scale, they're just further behind time-wise, or whether there's an opinion or an acceptance there that they're happy for this sector to continue doing what they're doing. But in my opinion, it's worth clarifying, but GB seem to be doing something a bit different than Northern Ireland on this case.
And I think Department for Transport in London are happy that what's happening in GB is right. But
sorry, say that again.
I think Department for Transport in London are happy that what's the community transport sector in Britain is right. You know, it's operating legally. That's my feeling or my opinion on it. So.
But it's a key sort of wee difference that there seems to be that the Northern Ireland are sort of running ahead of GB on this understanding of the EU legislation.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Can I, sorry, Mr. McGuinness, can I just add one small point? You said you weren't from a rural area. We actually do provide some transport within the urban areas in partnership with Disability Action.
So you up to the Assembly?
Oh, we'll take him down to the rural area, invite him down to Scotland.
He's more than welcome to visit us anytime. But yes, just to let you know, it's not just rural. We do sort of an integrated transport scheme. So we do provide some urban transport as well.
For disabled persons
and older people.
And older people.
In urban areas.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Can I ask you this too? It may be helpful to you. Your membership. How do people become a member of your organisation and can dial? It's only a member of your partnership can make use of that dial a lift service. I mean, do you have a criteria to say that they're from deprived communities or they are disabled or they are isolated, that you can prove that you are breaching that gap?
If they live in a rural area and have no access to transport, so if they don't have a car, if they can't drive, if they have a disability, if they have limited mobility, if they have a reason for not being able to access public transport or drive, then yes, they can become a member of our organisation, and they have to fill in a detailed membership form, and that has to be assessed, and the membership then is approved. You know, it's not a case of somebody just rings up. It's not like a taxi service. We don't just take phone calls from random strangers off the street.
Yes. So there is a clear criteria. These are people, you know, who have special needs for transport.
And the majority of our passengers would be elderly.
Okay.
You know, the highest percentage of our members would all be elderly people or people with disabilities, because those are the people most in need and most isolated.
Okay. Lord Morrow?
Yeah, Anita, just on the back of that question there. You said those who don't have cars. Does that mean those who don't have access to cars?
Yes, somebody may be, you may have a couple, for example, living at home in a house, and the husband may take the car to work, whereas the wife may be at home with a young child, for example. We'd provide service for the wife if she doesn't have access to transport when there's no car there.
And just back on the volunteer drivers, you'd be insisting on a person with a clean driving licence.
Yes.
and that their insurance is all intact.
Yes, and we often write to their insurance company just to clarify that they're okay for volunteering, although has been agreement now reached with the insurance companies that we don't need to. But in history, it has been a case that every driver that came forward, we wrote to their insurance company for them to prove that they were fully insured.
And this doesn't add any cost to their insurance
No.
to participate in the scheme?
No.
Doesn't. In your presentation here, you tell us that since the introduction of the dial-a-lift service in 2009, some 209,809 trips, I think it's total dial-a-lift passenger trips, was 210,000 basically. How has that, do you have the year-on-year step, and where do you see this will say, if that, looking at those figures, where you were 5 years ago, where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
If we're still funded the way we are, as Paddy said, the demand is increasing, the population is getting older. Older people will probably drive less, I would hope, some of them. But again, we do get recommendations from people to say, such and such really shouldn't be driving, and we would maybe have a chat to that person and encourage them to use our services for the safety of the other road users and themselves. But with an older population, and again, the introduction of Transforming Your Care, and as Paddy says, with health, particularly walking away from a lot of things, the demand is increasing. Like our trips in the last 12 months have increased 10%.
And sorry, just to clarify, Lord Moore, that 210,000 trips is just for 1 year. That's for the year 2012-13.
Right.
So that's not a cumulative figure. So
glad you clarified that, Paddy, because I'm just looking at it. But yes, you do say here, Northern Ireland by the Rural Community Transport in the year April 12 to March 13, I think, and then you give this box of figures. Right, Paddy or Anita, where do you see yourself in 5 years in light of that? Are you talking about a doubling of these figures, or are you saying that there's going to be a peak?
The problem with the numbers of trips we deliver is that our budget is limited, and we, at some stage, those trips, there could be some people travelling 5 days a week and another person travelling once a week. And there have been cases as the budget, as you reach your sort of the ceiling of your budget, you might have to ration your services a wee bit. And we have a case in our area where for a year we insisted that you could only have 3 trips per week. So the budget nearly puts a limit on the activity we can deliver. Now, as I say, those figures started in 2009 at 20 or 30,000, 110,000, and the year we're just finishing in the 31st of March, those figures again will be up to 225. So you're looking at a 5-10% increase each year. The problem we're having is what's limiting us is the budget, not there's demand there that we're trying to manage as best we can.
It's just on the demand that I want to ask a question around. Have you had to refuse? To what degree have you not been able to respond to demand?
We don't tend to refuse trips. What we do is we encourage that person to work with. What we do is if somebody rings up and we can't do the time that they want, we'll encourage them to go at a different time with somebody else. Or if that person has an appointment, we'll get the other person to work with them. So you try and get a number of people on a vehicle together. Not only is it you better use your resources, but it also makes efficiency sense. Rather than having empty vehicles running around, you try and get as many people travelling together. Plus, there's also the social aspect. If you're on a bus or in a car with other people, you have that social interaction as well that you wouldn't have maybe on your own.
We have so many options available with volunteers and minibuses that we don't really have to refuse. And because our volumes are quite high now, we used to be 19 partnerships, now we're down to 11. But it's like 7 operating areas. And I think because there's so much volume happening in each area that we are able to double up and get more people into the vehicles, which means that because the big majority of us, our cost per trip to the department is actually falling year on year. And I think it's because as we put more and more people onto the same vehicle, so that's just managing the resources better.
Okay. Is it a problem with privacy? I'm sure you're sensitive about that. Then, if you're doubling up, people maybe if say they're going to the hospital or GP, they don't want people to know about it.
But again, we provide a transport system service, so it's not a case that we tell the other people on the vehicle where they're going or why they're going somewhere. We just pick them up and bring them there and drop them off.
Okay.
That has never been an issue. again, the people are very happy to get transport where they need to go and when they need to go. So,
And you have a complaint system if, say, your
Yeah.
users want to make a complaint?
yeah, we have a full complaint system in each partnership.
Okay.
And again, if people aren't happy with our service, they can always go to the department, which they have been known to do.
And the Consumer Council is an avenue as well. Under their remit, they can go to the Consumer Council if they're still not satisfied.
Okay. No more questions for you?
Just a final point,
Yes,
because
sure.
I think it's an important point. In relation to business service, if you don't deliver, what's going to happen to those people?
They're going to become more isolated, more vulnerable, and there'll be a bigger
don't come pressure on other departments
health
to
in
deliver
particular,
one way or another,
yeah.
or they'll do out the service.
But as I say, we take people to local GPs, which is a key
Yeah.
priority for us and for the members. A lot of our members will travel to the local GP. If they can't access their local doctor, their health is going to deteriorate.
Yeah, no problem.
You know, and if they can't get to the doctor, their mental health may deteriorate.
Yeah.
If they can't get to day centres, if they can't get to education facilities, if they can't go and get their hair done, mental health will suffer. There has been some report done somewhere where more people are taking strokes and heart attacks through isolation and loneliness than from diet and exercise. So that tells you a lot.
Okay. You want to come
Thank
in
you,
there?
Chair. It's not a question, more of a comment. Obviously, I've met with yourselves previously, and just to say that I think it's a fantastic work that you're doing on the ground. I think it's vital, especially in our changing times and economy. I think there are many more issues to come in the future, and many more difficulties, and I wouldn't like to see this service lost. I think it's fantastic, so I encourage you to continue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I just want to say the very same thing as what Pam has said. I'm very conscious of the excellent delivery of service in Mid-Tyrone and the Omagh district. I mean, I know the people who are the users of the service. You describe them as, socially isolated and vulnerable, and in very many cases that is the case. It's actually hard to imagine the local landscape without this type of service now. It's so necessary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And one of the key points with the volunteers, a lot of the volunteers live in the local areas. As Barry says, he knows the people in his area. He would know the volunteers as well. The volunteers know the passengers, and it's somebody that they know coming to pick them up. It's not some random stranger landing on their doorstep. It's somebody they know, or else it's a minibus that's clearly branded. A lot of older people have a fear of crime. I think our service reduces that in a way because they know the people picking them up, or else it's a branded vehicle, so they're very happy to travel on the service we provide.
Okay. Well, on that,
thank you very much.
on that note, thank you very much for coming, and we will be talking to the office this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
It's good to have a rural subject now.
Okay, members, I'm sure you have a lot of questions you want to put to Ian Greenway and Sharon Clements. Members, there is a departmental briefing paper at page 124.
I love it.
Members from the department there. So, members, you probably may want to ask them to comment on the points raised in the previous session by the partnerships, as well as correspondence now from a church group who have expressed concerns about costs of compliance, which is at page 134. Oh, sorry. Is that the departmental briefing paper? There is a church group. Yeah, that's the church group. Sorry, that's the wrong information for you. We don't have a departmental briefing paper. Page 1. We have one. 134. Is that 124 as well? Oh, sorry.
134.
This is 134. 124. We have a departmental paper.
I don't see that.
That's not right. You see, that's what I mean. It's That's incorrect.
120.
Correspondence.
120. Sorry, 120.
120.
120.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know I read it last night.
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. It's okay, no problem. Ian, for a change, not to be talking to you about taxis.
Oh, don't mention that. That's an
Promised
urban
I
issue.
wasn't going
Don't
to use the
mention-
T word this morning, Chair.
And it's good to hear the response from the partnerships that there's good communication. So, well done. And no, previously it's been complained about difficulties of maybe communicating well with the departments. So, but as you have heard, quite a lot of queries. Maybe first of all, if you can clarify about the legal position, whether they are going to be seen as a commercial organisation, or how can we get around it?
Might it be possible, thank you, Chair, for your welcoming us. Sharon Clements, who works in the bus policy team, is with me. Might it be possible just to talk about the breadth of the review? I recognise the last presentation has focused particularly on one aspect, one sector of the bus industry, but the review is of bus operator licensing for the entire bus industry. So if I may, I just perhaps come back in from the bigger picture. Very happy to pick up those points. And I don't think in my time we've briefed this committee on bus operator licensing and the review of licensing. We have briefed the Regional Development Committee twice on it, so apologies for any members of that committee who've heard this and some of this before.
All right, they didn't tell us.
I've set out the background to the review and in the paper, but perhaps just to pick out a few salient points. It has been long-running. It has been complex. It has not yet concluded, but the likely next step when we can reach some sort of consolidated policy position, subject to ministerial approval, will be a targeted consultation. By targeted, I mean focusing on the residual issues, because as Paddy and Anita and Billy said, very many issues we're all agreeing on. And one thing we all agree on is the 1967 Transport Act is no longer fit for purpose, 50 years on from when the policy and that was developed. And you'll be aware that on the goods vehicle side, which was also regulated by the same Act, the Assembly passed the Licensing of Operators Act. That became effective in 2012, a more robust regulatory regime, which is already paying dividends in terms of regulating the industry. And one thing we're conscious of as we try and take time to resolve issues is all of that time we know we have a regulatory regime which is no longer fit for purpose, which is allowing illegal operators more space to act than if we had more modern legislation, and that is having an impact, of course, on the competitive position of compliant operators. So we're talking here about everybody from TransLink down to the school minibus. So it's commercial operators in this space as well, and we're not able to take, we, the department, through DVA, are not able to take as robust action as we would like because of the 50-year-old legislation we're working. But this will require change to primary legislation, so we are looking 3 or 4 years away from implementing on the ground legislation, even with a fair wind. So that I want to make those points. And we are talking about buses. We're talking about vehicles with 9 passenger seats or more. There is much grey in all of this work, but one firm legislative line is 8 seats or fewer is a car, 9 seats or fewer is a bus, whether it be a minibus, a full bus, whatever. So we have one line. And given the amount of grey, I'm an engineer by profession, I like a few points of definiteness. That is one point of definiteness.
Can I say that again?
9 passenger seats or more is a bus.
Okay.
Lower than that is a car.
It's a car.
So you've got as a driver and 8 passengers, that's a car?
Driver and 8 passengers is a bus.
Did I say the wrong
So
number?
they
I always
include
get
the
confused.
drivers
So
as
the
well.
drivers counted as a
9
Including the
passenger
driver.
seats or more.
Seats.
seats, but the driver's counted as a passenger seat?
There's a number of different definitions, but I'll give you the definition that's in the 67 Act for minibus and actually clarify things.
It's important because there is a type of I don't know what you call it, a minibus or a car that has a...
There are vehicles working in and around that space, I agree, Tom.
Okay. A small bus, a minibus, means a motor vehicle which is adapted to carry 8 or more passengers, but not more than 16 passengers.
So it's 8 passenger seats or more,
Okay.
so it's 9 including the driver.
Yes.
Apologies and thank you for pulling me up. The tests we are using in this that have been agreed, but as often the tests when you delve into the detail is when you hit the difficulties. We need to regulate for a safe, fair and fit for purpose sector. We need to allow a vibrant and innovative community transport sector to continue to flourish. And the work that you've heard about, and we've had extensive dialogue with the partnerships, as with all other sectors in the industry, the work they're doing is absolutely vital to Northern Ireland society. Absolutely no doubt about that. So that test has to keep being brought back. The need to ensure a level regulatory playing field with rights and duties for the various groups within the sector being kept in appropriate balance. So you can't have all the rights from a higher tier and only the duties of a lower tier. There needs to be levelness in this. And the need to develop a regime with clear distinctions between categories of licence and which is enforceable. If we simply take greyness into law, we simply push the problem to enforcement officers and police officers at the side of the road. So there has to be clear distinctions between the different zones. We have developed that into a document working through the Bus Forum, as Paddy said, into what's been colloquially called the straw man, which is really the policy development document. It clearly says on the front this is not finalised policy. It is an attempt to bring together in one place the work in progress, so we all have a reference point. That does set out at present 2 tiers. A full operator licence, basically you can work within the bus sector without restraint, and an own account licence. There's no mention of the word commercial in either the definition of either tier. That's, in this sense, an irrelevance. Whether you make money from it or not, you can set out to make money and lose money, and vice versa. What we do have is a small number of residual issues. Of course, because they are residual issues at this length of time, this stage of remove from when we started, they are complex issues. They wouldn't still be with us if they weren't complex. One of those, and to pick that up first, is where do the rural community transport partnerships sit in the tiers? We're talking about a small part of the overall bus sector, the bus industry, but an absolutely vital part from what you've heard. Perhaps I can sort of reassure the committee on a few things. Charitable status, again, is an irrelevance for this. Many, many charities have trading licences. Oxfam has trading licences for its shops. That is an irrelevance, and there is no... If you need a licence to do the work that fits your charitable aims, you get that licence. It has no impact whatsoever on your charitable status. So perhaps just to reassure the committee on that point. DRD is responsible for funding the social inclusion work that is carried out by the partnerships. If, for whatever reason, the partnerships are unable to do that work, it remains DRD's responsibility to tackle social exclusion, including through transport activities. Who they get to deliver that is potentially a secondary consideration to DRD, to the fact that it is delivered in a cost-effective manner that meets society's needs, whilst respecting we all have finite budgets. And Billy and co talked about that. I know there are concerns amongst the partnerships that if they are in the upper tier and are seen alongside bus companies, that will impact what DRD will consider in terms of how they fund this activity. In a sense, the short answer is that's for DRD to answer as a direct point, but we recognise this. We have been working extremely closely with DRD for some years now on this. There's a lot of work in the bus sector, not just this, where we and DRD have neighbouring roles. And the line we have agreed with DRD that has been shared with the partnerships of Bus Forum and others is, and this is reading from a DRD document, the review of operator licensing by DOE is a separate exercise and is not linked to the policy or operational changes being considered by DRD. Neither will the decisions being made by DRD be influenced by the decisions of DOE. So we have attempted, working with DRD, to get as clear a statement as we can that these are 2 separate exercises. I do accept one can't prove a negative, and the partnerships remain concerned, and we are very aware of that and working closely with them and with DRD around that. DRD have their own legislative constraints. There are EU directives, there is EU procurement law. This is certainly above de minimis thresholds for having to procure unless there are compelling reasons not to go to tender. They have to make sure that those compelling reasons remain compelling, or else there could be legal proceedings against them. And that, I make general statements rather than anything more specific. Another concern I want to dispel is volunteer drivers will not be impacted by any of this. Whether somebody is paid or not is completely irrelevant to bus operator licensing. And that is a matter between them, their employer, the organisation for whom they work, and the taxman. It is not in any way relevant for bus operator licensing. What bus operator licensing would say is if you are going to work in the upper tier in an unrestricted field, you need to have people driving your vehicles who are properly tested and licensed to drive those vehicles. At the moment, under a 10B permit, people drive minibuses on their car licence. That's a legal position. We sometimes dance around with a particular category called D1, not for hire and reward, but the law is clear. People drive a minibus on their car licence. Driving a minibus, as you'll all be aware, is a very different thing than driving a car. It's a heavier vehicle. It's often filled with people and all of those distractions. So it is an activity that carries significant risk. So whether you are paid or not is a redundant consideration. It is whether you are tested and licensed. As I say, we currently have people driving minibuses on car licenses. Now, we have to be proportionate in our regulation. The person who drives a minibus once or twice a year to take people to a scout outing, that's one thing. A person who drives a minibus on a regular daily, weekly basis is another point on the spectrum, up to the Translink bus driver at the other end of the spectrum. And we need to consider where we draw lines along that spectrum. Just mentioning the scout leader, people in the lower tier will not be covered by driver's hours legislation, so they would not have the 8 hours or 10 hours, all of that. But if you are working all day on a Friday, as a civil servant, a teacher, whatever, taking a scout group to Enniskillen, being a scout leader all weekend and probably getting very little sleep, and then driving them back with no rest period, that is not good practice. Driving a bus is a risky activity. So we are working with volunteer groups to see how we put some guidance out about, for heaven's sake, make sure on that last afternoon you get a few hours rest away from being scout leader before you drive that minibus.
I remember a tragic case in England. A teacher took children to a concert in London, drove back, she fell off to sleep driving.
Yes, and frighteningly,
a whole group of youngsters.
And there are potential judicial reviews around that. But I just became aware this morning that the sister of one of those school children killed is now a teacher and was asked to drive a minibus on her car licence for a school, which was, I suspect, somewhat insensitive. She certainly found that. What we do know from data we've shared with the partnerships is there are 89 regular drivers of partnership minibuses that do not currently have a full minibus driving licence. And we're talking about 3 to 4 years to primary legislation. So 3 to 4 years for those 89 people to sit a driving test for a minibus, and they're regularly driving minibuses. DRD has indicated they would look positively at funding that one-off activity of those people being funded through the test. I say all of this perhaps just to reassure the committee a little that A, all sorts of engagement is going on, and B, volunteer status is immaterial. It is testing and licensing status that would need to be considered. There are also issues about whether people can pay fares on the bus if you're in the lower tier or the upper tier. And we're very conscious that that, again, is a grey zone. You go to a lunch club and you pay the money for the lunch club and the bus when you get on the bus, or you pay it to the people who do the lunch. And what we don't want to do is dance around on heads of pins on this. But the payment of fare is a crucial legislative issue of where you pay it and to whom you pay it, whether we like it or not. So we're looking at potentially a consultation targeted on these specific residual issues because, as Anita and Co said, all of the other things about repute, about vehicle maintenance, we don't differ at all, and they are doing wide range of checks. They've described the checks they're doing for safety of the drivers in terms of access NI and everything. They're fully complying with good practice and best practice in those areas. The volunteering strategy was mentioned. The volunteering strategy from DSD makes clear that volunteering is about gaining additional skills and training and experience. So doing a minibus driving test as a result of being a volunteer and being funded to do that is absolutely aligned with the volunteering strategy. We have a few more pieces of work to do before we get to a finalised position for the Minister to clear to move into a consultation. One of those is to meet the Irish authorities because they have introduced licensing for their equivalent of partnerships precisely as our upper tier, and that was introduced a number of months ago, and we want to go and talk to them further. We've had discussions with them about exactly what has that meant in practice, and indeed is their sector the same as ours. or is it different? So can we draw? What parallels can we or can we not draw? And there are continuing developments on the EU front. Alban made points about what EU law may or may not say. And there was a court ruling in October last year. So that since, in a sense, we took our own legal soundings, which makes very clear non-commercial means a hobby. And it uses the word a hobby. And so it's restricting that. That court ruling at the moment is extremely restrictive about what non-commercial means. EU law is clear that not profit making and non-commercial are different. Those words are used in different ways. But there are state aid challenges against the UK government, against local authorities in England for funding community transport without tender, often funding themselves to deliver community transport, which is moving into the competitive space with the private industry. Not unsurprisingly, the private industry is taking European court challenges against those. Ideally, we would be in the space of knowing the results of those before we move, but for two reasons. One, because we've started and it was recognised as something needing to be done, and two, because there's a journey to primary legislation. Neither have we been able simply to pause and say we wait for this court ruling because then there'll be another one and there'll be another case and so on. But the test is exclusively non-commercial. That is the test to be able to move out of the upper tier, which is EU drawn, to the lower tier, or any other tier outside that upper tier. And exclusively non-commercial, as you'll appreciate, means you can't have one iota of commercialness in your activity. It's a very high bar, exclusively non-commercial. And the legal ruling in October that non-commercial means a hobby takes us even further, tightens that down even more, and we are working with DfT to get to grips with what that consequence of that is, because it's not just in a new regime. The consequence of that is on the streets today and tomorrow, not just when we get to a new regime. So I hope that's given you a flavour of the work that has been going on, the complexity of it. We have been engaging intensively and extensively with all sectors of the industry, including the partnerships, including the commercial industry, including education, library boards, health trusts, etc. We also are now looking at the 10B permit in operation at the moment. We'd hoped to avoid that step by getting on with the new regime. Now that we're looking past this Assembly mandate into the next for legislation, we're saying there's 85 bodies can award 10B permits at the moment. The department cannot award 10B permits for minibuses. So there are 2,911 minibuses on the vehicle register that the department does not know what permit has been issued for them. Some don't require them, but others, there are 85 bodies out there. Some are very good, like CTA, at informing the department of who they've issued permits to. Others less good. The permits are open-ended. They don't have any lifetime on them. They're the life of the vehicle, which again makes tracking things difficult. So we are looking at that. The 2,911 keepers have been written to. That's, as you would expect, elicited a range of correspondence saying, I didn't know I had to do anything about this. CTA has been very helpful in guiding those organisations as to whether they need a permit or not and walking them through the necessary steps. So I hope that's sort of given you a broad flavour of this complex area and perhaps picked up on some of the points that Anita and Billy and Paddy raised with you. But of course, very happy to answer further questions.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. That's only a very comprehensive guide over a very complex journey. And you mentioned about the fares. So you said if they would take an elderly group for lunch, that maybe they can pay the lunch and the fares together. Okay, so that may avoid then the issue about whether they're paying for it. But the other journeys, there's no other way around it.
Sharon.
You know, if you're taking someone, an older person, to a GP.
Yes, that is one of the reasons why we think at this stage that the partnerships would be better in the upper tier, because in terms of the lower tier, the own account, most people have engaged before they use the bus. So if the Scouts are going, they've got parental slips and they've paid in advance. The lunch club, again, we've got the argument that they could pay for the lunch and have a contribution, to the bus. So in terms of fares, it is a key issue. And I think to an extent we need more information because we don't actually know what's going on out there, and that'll be why it's part of our consultation. And following the consultation and some more research and some more benchmarking, we'll make a decision on that. But looking at it right at the moment, the charging of fare on a bus we would consider would make you eligible for the upper tier licence.
Sure. I think the partnership's main concern is that they may lose the 290 volunteers at the moment driving, people around. But you're saying, you're not specifically saying that they have to go, just that 89 of them, of the volunteers, would have to just go for the extra licence to be able to drive minibuses.
Yeah,
Okay.
Our proposals for the upper tier licence don't go around employment will be required. It'll be the professional qualifications for the drivers delivering it, rather than whether they're paid or not. So volunteers could continue in the upper tier licence, provided they met the driving licence qualifications.
Okay.
We may just add to that we are conscious that another key service the partnerships provide to the community is lending minibuses or hiring minibuses, whatever the financial arrangement may be, to community groups. Indeed, in some cases, I know the community groups have got the funding for the minibus and the partnership looks after it for them, maintains it, uses it. They then have first call on use. And we are conscious there are therefore hundreds and hundreds of more scout leaders and others who use partnership vehicles. And we addressed that about a year ago and agreed that the scout group who borrowed a vehicle would need to have their own account licence. And then their own account licence would say they borrow vehicles or commission vehicles from EasyLink partnership. And when that vehicle is earned across the scout group's own account licence goes on the windscreen. The scout group is then responsible if they're speeding or somebody's driving dangerously. If it's maintenance of the vehicle and it's not immediately apparent, it may be the registered keeper of the vehicle rather than them. But the occasional volunteer drivers of the partnerships vehicles would, we believe, and would all be covered through that sort of arrangement.
Okay, and they're all under Tier 2. Would they still be granted a 10D permit?
No, everybody. One thing that has been agreed is everyone will carry a licence.
Okay.
A 10B permit is rather quaintly named, but it's an exclusion from all licensing vehicle and operator rules. And one thing that has been agreed is running a minibus is an important task that must be taken seriously, so everybody should carry a licence. The other positive of that is the enforcement authorities can take a graduated approach. If somebody's breaking the rules because they just really don't understand them, they can educate. If somebody is breaking the rules because they are sticking two fingers up at the system, they can go up more quickly to prosecution. Secondly, once we know who is licensed, anybody out there with a bus who isn't licensed is much more visible. So that's a number of reasons why we've gone for everybody in a licensing regime, but proportionate to their use.
Okay. Carol?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Here's the bottom line. I would like to see us come to a system where, we get the balance right between the provision of service, all right? Because that's, to me, that's key. I'm not arguing the case about compliance in terms of road safety and all that there, and that's a problem. But I do see here some reference to the benefits of what happened in relation to the goods vehicle licence system. And I think that's slightly different. I don't think they actually compare that, because it's slightly easier in terms of we've seen through DVA in London and that's how that operates and how you look at the compliance issue. My main concern is that the departments are not working together in this here matter. So if you do your bit in terms of compliance and they already do their bit in terms of what they're trying to offer in terms of the rural transport and in relation to if you take all the departments, DHSS, if we don't come to some arrangement where we can facilitate the provision of this service, they'll go back to each department to do their bit, and then those people who are out there needing the service are definitely going to lose out. But is that a fair bet? Now, I mean, I know you're only looking at compliance and doing your bit in your department to make sure that these vehicles and the operation of all those vehicles are compliant. Is that correct?
We're looking about a safe, fair and fit for purpose bus sector in Northern Ireland.
Right. So, in essence, you're not really looking at the provision of service.
We are looking at making sure any services that are provided with minibuses or buses are provided in a safe way, and there's other tests that I alluded to. We are working, I can certainly allay your concerns, we're probably working on a more than weekly basis with DRD officials, and the umbrella they're working within is integrated transport, and you'll be aware the Regional Development Committee published a report on that a number of months ago, and they're highlighting there are buses, for instance, school buses running empty back from the school at 9 o'clock, and there's a Translink bus running on the same route. And how can we reduce the carbon emissions, improve the road safety by doing that?
Let's not get down that route. Let's get realistic here, because I mean, I represent a large rural constituency, and I know the issues and individuals and how they need to get to the doctors and everything else. Let's be realistic here. But it's within your scope and within the department's scope. We look at a certain tier that will facilitate the likes of these delivery service. Now, and I take the point that Alban made earlier on a bit about legal situation, because one legal opinion differs from another. There's no doubt about it. So that I wouldn't be saying that we're going to stand over one legal opinion without being challenged by another. But what I want to get that point, because and I appreciate the presentation, but we've had presentations on a lot of other issues, as you know. But I want to get that point, and I would like it on record here, a point where we can bring through a tiered system here that will facilitate delivery and provision of the service that these people are doing. That's what I would like to see. And I'd like you to work with whatever department it takes to deliver.
Well, I can certainly commit to the ongoing engagement, particularly with DRD, because that is the channel for rural development funds, including for transport, but for other things as well. We have engaged to a more limited extent with a number of other departments, but we took the view we wanted to get to a fairly solid document before engaging with them. We absolutely will engage with them more formally before consultation. But I think probably the thing I can reassure you on, Cathal, is the numbers I gave you, that the difference, the cost of putting the partnerships in the upper tier is an £89,000 one-off cost that DRD is looking positively towards funding. So I don't think there are cost impediments. Going into the upper tier allows the partnerships a considerable more amount of freedom, and they are very entrepreneurial and innovative. They will be able to use that in the upper tier in a way they would be constrained from doing in the lower tier. They've already proven that they're able to do things that then provide funding which they pass to their community activities. A number of them already hold licences for the current top tier, what's called a road service licence, and run some vehicles in that, some in the partnership. That's creating additional overheads for them of company house reporting, accounts, all the rest of it. They could collapse that back into one organisation. So some of this has significant advantages for the partnerships. The issues we have focused down on, in a sense, and in a way I'm pleased there weren't additional issues coming out, because we have engaged closely with Billy and others. 3 issues. What will DRD do as a result of this? The drivers, not the volunteer drivers, but the drivers currently driving minibuses on a car licence, and the collection of fares on board. They're the 3 things we've come down to. DRD have given us a very clear statement there's no connection, but I do accept you can't prove a negative. We have, with the help of the partnerships, come down to 89 drivers and a one-off cost of £1,000 per driver to put them through a test. And then the fares on board is a thorny issue that we're still working through. They are the only impediments to the partnerships being able to be in an upper tier which will allow them to be more innovative, more entrepreneurial, and therefore support their activity or support their provision of community transport.
But if they're in Tier 1, they can charge fares as
Correct.
and when
There's no question about, just as Translink can, for instance.
And I'm still not convinced. I mean, because I've seen how it's operated in the past, and I mean, you know, you've heard all the questions. I'm not too sure where you've answered all the questions, but the issue has been raised. But I'll listen to all the members, because I still need to come back to you in terms of, because this has been on 5 or 6 years, and we went from 1 tier to 2 tier to 3 tier, and we're back and forward.
Maybe I just explained at one point there were 3 tiers, and the middle tier has sort of bobbled around a bit in definition, as middle tiers often do in any regime. Philosophically, we wanted as few tiers as possible because every time you've got a tier break, you've got more issues about what can be happening across the tier. Enforcement on the ground becomes more complex. We created a middle tier about 18 months ago predominantly for the partnerships, not entirely for the partnerships, but predominantly. The only difference we could find between the middle tier and the top tier when we talked to the partnerships were the 89 drivers. There was a secondary issue about financial standing. You have to have a certain amount of money provenly available to maintain the vehicles. That's not an issue for the partnerships. We've had that discussion with them. So the only thing that was stopping, if you like, extinguishing a tier and going back to 2 tiers, which is purer and simpler and easier on the ground and for the operators, was 89 drivers without a minibus driver licence. So we've come around at it different ways. To put those people in the middle tier and to give the partnerships the freedoms they need to deliver the range of stuff they're doing would be incredibly complicated because of this exclusively non-commercial tag. Now add another layer of it has to be a hobby. And much as Billy and Anita and Paddy are passionate about what they do, I don't think it would fit into the hobby that is now a European court ruling. We need to fully unpick that.
But that's one opinion.
Well, it's a European court judgment.
Well, I mean, we've heard this in the past. To be honest, I'll go back to and I'll finish this point, Chair, and I may come back in later. But I'll finish this because I'm keen to see something that will retain the service that's been delivered. And what you're saying there, in all you've explained, it's not going to, and it's going to be then under some other. We're going to force it in. We'll be asking questions as MLAs of other departments how they deliver for the vulnerable people. Because I had this debate 5 years ago in DRD when we took provision of transport through TransLink, and they couldn't do it in rural areas. So I'm very, very concerned about that.
I recognise that, but in a sense, with respect, that's a question for DRD officials, not us, as a direct point of how they will ensure provision. I am aware that procurement directives get ever tighter, and I suspect therefore, there will be ever greater scrutiny of £6 million of government money being grant funded without tender. That's as a general statement. The DRD would need to.
In retrospect, at some point in time, we're going to have to get departments to work together on this matter, on all other matters. But with respect, you can't just keep saying it's back down to another department. We'll leave it at that.
Okay.
But I'd like to see all departments working together.
Well, I assure you we are.
Well, you just have to send that keep referring back to another department.
Well, it's I don't have the legal powers to grant
but I'm telling
money.
my opinion, but I'm not content with somebody keeps saying to me, it's up to another department. We have to work together collectively, and the departments have to work together collectively.
Well, they are.
Deliver it. Well,
I reassure you, Chair, that we are, but DRD doesn't have the virus to regulate bus operators. I don't have the DOE does not have the virus to fund rural development, regional development funds. So we can work together, but still individual ministers have to sign off within their virus.
Okay. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. I was on the Environment Committee when this first came, 2008. I was on the Regional Development Committee in 2011 when we... and
here you are.
Now I'm back here, and we're no further forward. And whenever you've been responding to, I suppose, a number of the questions, even from Cathal Boylan, if you could see the faces of the 3 people who were giving the presentation when you were answering questions, they don't believe you. And that's a problem in itself, because if your interpretation is one thing, their interpretation of it is obviously different in certain aspects of it. We're sort of caught in here somewhere trying to decide who's right and who's not. And, the people here that were giving us their presentation from the community transport sector, they're the people in the cold face of this, delivering it day and daily. What you're doing is, dealing with the decision around whether and how to licence them. And I suppose that's where it sort of, in a sense, gets a wee bit messy. Licensing is, as we know, is environment, but the actual community transport and the funding and of that is regional development. So I do understand the difference between the two, but when the people here running the community transport or having to deal with the regional development, department, and ask the questions around the impact that this is going to have. The longer this goes on, and I think I heard you, I wrote it down, 3 to 4 years before we get this basically sorted. This has been going on, as I said, 2008, long enough. There's uncertainty within the sector, and I certainly don't know from today. I feel as though you have your decision made in respect of putting it into the higher tier. I'm disappointed if that's the case, because I believe, like what say Cathal Boylan referred to, there is somewhere else in there that the community transport sector should fit in. I'm not sure of where it is as yet, but I certainly do have concerns around it just been put into here's where we think it should be, and that's it. I feel there's a lot more work to be done. I'm glad you said 3 to 4 years, because it seems that's the length of time that it may take just to get an outcome. But I just feel that, well, firstly, can you answer me in the sense, has this decision been taken? Are you, and we use the word of a former Environment Minister, minded to move to the upper tier for the community transport sector?
That's for the Minister to decide, and indeed ultimately for the Assembly to legislate for.
Yeah, well,
officials
recommend.
What we have tried to do is resolve all issues before the legislative draftsmen start their work. The danger and difficulty of that is we know there are illegal operators out there that we cannot regulate effectively under the current legislation. So the longer we go on, the more difficult we make it for compliant operators. And I'm very conscious of that. I'm very conscious we've now come to a point in this Assembly mandate that moving a bill to an Act in this mandate from where we are now is extremely challenging, if not nigh on impossible. So there would be 3 points I make. One is, we're talking here about an extremely valuable community transport sector, but we are talking about of the range of 116 minibuses out of 7,000 vehicles, and we do have to regulate effectively for all 7,000 vehicles, and there are people losing out competitively at the moment, and indeed going out of business because there are illegal operators taking their business away. 2 is, we have worked extremely closely with community partnerships, and we have come down to 3 issues, one of which we've got as clear a statement as is possible from DRD that this is unrelated, and 2 other issues we're still working through, but we have quantified the driver issue. And we cannot identify significant issues, aside from the DRD question mark, that would hinder the partnerships by being in the upper tier. The issue of collection of fares on board would suddenly go away. The issue of 89 drivers would need regularising. It may be that has to be regularised anyway if the European Court ruling stands. That's an issue today. It's not an issue for when we get to the new regime. And we want to move on as quickly as we can. We've probably spent, in retrospect, perhaps a bit too long trying to resolve every single issue, but we are conscious once stuff is drafted, amending drafting is a lot more complicated than having clear legislative instructions. So that's what we've been grappling with. But the commercial bus operators are represented in the public gallery today as well. They are shouting louder and louder about, we are losing out competitively to operators you cannot tackle effectively under the 67 Act because we do not have new legislation in. So and that's jobs as well. So I am conscious of that. And in a sense, we're trying to sort everything out. We're down to a very small number of issues. And what was very positive is, I'm sure they're shaking their heads behind me. I was shaking my heads at times when they were here, and that's part of the appearing before the committee. But they reaffirmed what I've said, that there is a small number of issues, these 3 issues. Indeed, they didn't explicitly mention fares on board, but that is a remaining issue. This is what's left. Of course, that's the most complex stuff, or else it wouldn't be the stuff left. But we are working extremely closely with DRD. What we do know is that if DRD are forced to go to tender now, the partnerships could not bid for the work. So that is another imperative, because they could not get a road service licence for their vehicles as it currently stands. So therefore, that is another imperative. If DRD are forced to go to tender, we need the new regime in before they have to. So that's another driver to try and move this on. Fully take your point that it's Paddy and Anita and Billy and Bob and the others, Ian and the others, who are stuck at the coalface with their boards wondering what's going on in this uncertainty. Absolutely take that point. I want to bring certainty. I want to bring the right certainty. And right means complying with the law, delivering on those 4 tests. I think we are much further on than we were even a year ago in terms of having narrowed and narrowed and narrowed down through constructive engagement throughout with all sectors to resolve remaining differences. We're down to less than a handful now. We need to get those over the line, and in my opinion, we then need to move fairly swiftly out of the policy making into the legislative process. There'll be a committee stage of the bill. These issues, I'm sure, will come back round at that point. Ideally, they'd be fixed before we go amending drafting, but I think we probably have to move on into those stages to try and reduce uncertainty.
In respect of the volunteers who use their own cars, I think you said there would be no change to that.
This is a review of buses. This is not a review of cars. That piece is not on the agenda at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Colin?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I just focus on the payment of fares on board. Can you just explain again what the advice around that is? Because if it's a state aid issue, that should be about competition, isn't that the case? You know, and if in a lot of these areas there are no services to speak of for a lot of these people, well, there is no competition. That's why DRD has, for however many years, funded these community organisations, because they're providing a service rather than competing in a commercial scenario. So I don't quite understand how payment towards the cost, a cost that is subvented by DRD, could be a state aid issue. I'm no expert on it. I've had some experience around transport and state aid around airports and stuff, but I mean, I just don't get who they're competing against if there's no service, if there's no competition in a lot of the cases.
I agree with you. I don't see the link between what we're suggesting around fares and state aid. In terms of fares, we are trying to create a licensing regime which meets the European standard, which is entirely non-commercial, exclusively non-commercial. We've identified that whether you charge the passenger or not, it is a factor in terms of commerciality, and we're trying to clarify that lower tier licence around, you know, what engagement there is with the passenger, because we've called it own account, which basically means that the people have engaged. You know, you're carrying your people who you know really well, like scouts and things like that. So in terms of that, I don't see the link of what we're deciding around fares and state aid. State aid, as you said, it's about funding transport which wouldn't otherwise be offered.
And there are community providers in England and Wales who have turnover of £60 million a year.
You said
there's a community transport provider in West London provides public transport on the Channel Islands. They're, as you might expect, of a different scale.
In your original remarks, where you talked about the fact that private operators would be challenging a lot of those community organisations in England and Wales and wherever else around state aid issues. When you've said that you don't see this as a state aid issue.
The issue about collection of fares on board is how strong is the connection between fare collection and being exclusively non-commercial or not being exclusively non-commercial. That is the question. I do believe we can come to a solution. What we can't have is an enforcement officer stopping a bus by the side of the road and dancing around on the head of the pin about what money was given to whom when. That isn't good legislation, and we need to avoid that at all costs.
So you think that that's one of the issues out of the three that could be sorted?
Yeah, I think.
That's the legal advice that you have around.
But the legal advice keeps coming back to exclusively non-commercial being a very high test, because you can't have one iota of commerciality. It's not majority non-commercial or on balance non-commercial. It is exclusively non-commercial. That is the challenge.
So what's your main problem? Your main problem is the hobby issue? Is that
well, this new legal ruling from the European Court says non-commercial narrows way down to private hobby. that creates an additional difficulty. I reinforce the point that that isn't just for the new regime, that is for current regime potentially.
That hasn't
and we are working with DFT to clarify that. There were questions earlier about what DFT is doing. I think Billy or Paddy suggested we're further ahead. I think to an extent DFT are fully briefed on what we're doing. DFT have not raised any specific objections to compliance with EU law, which they as the member state body have an interest in making sure about. They have not raised any issues with that. And in a sense, they are quite happy to let us go on a bit ahead and see what happens. They're also conscious that we're going to exactly where Ireland has already gone, so we're busy engaging with the Irish to understand that side of it as well.
The hobby, it's not a directive, the European Court ruling, is not the case. When was that, November?
That was in October last year, so, and that has been raised with the UK government as a basis for a pilot case, so potential infraction of the directive. So this is starting to move a bit more than it was.
It's been raised by who, sorry?
It's been raised by the Commission.
Okay.
With the UK government.
And has there been any advice sought from the Commission around what that actually, or is this just somebody interpreting, or somebody in DFT interpreting what it could be?
Well, the pilot case says, the court case says these are hobbies, and says you've got community transport providers of a much larger scale in England and Wales. Show me that that's a hobby. In essence, is what it says, and it asks a number of questions. What driver licence are they using to drive these buses? Are they being remunerated? Are these people tendering for work, which many of the English and Welsh ones are? Do local authorities pay consideration to these providers, which they do? Do communities of these community bus transports need to pay for the transport services? So that is a specific question the Commission is asking about. It's not saying on the bus, of course, because the Scouts pay in effect for maintenance of that bus, but they pay as part of going on the trip. And as Sharon says, the parents fill the slip in advance, the money goes to the Scout leader. And if the answer to any of these questions is yes, the UK government is asked to advise how it believes that's compliant with the directive.
I understand the implications. Have the UK government decided to challenge any of that in a policy way?
Well, the pilot case came through in the last 2 weeks. So we're at the very early stages working with DFT, because any of these pilot cases come to Northern Ireland, go to the relevant department. We're asked, is this a solely Northern Ireland issue? Is it a solely Britain issue? Is it one UK-wide that we're working together on? And this one is in the latter category.
This is going to have a major impact on rural communities here, but it's clearly going to have a major impact on rural communities across the water. So you would hope that from a policy perspective and a negotiating perspective, the British government would be trying to challenge some of these assertions from the court. But anyway, that's a bigger issue. In terms of the cars, just one concern I have, it will not be, clearly you've said it will not be regulated under the buses issue. But if people are paying money in cars, are you going to trap them then around the taxi licensing issue?
The volunteer car drivers gets us into another thorny area, just when you thought you'd heard them all, another thorny area of car sharing and car sharing legislation under Article 66 of the 1981 Road Traffic Order. And car sharing is very narrowly defined as two people sharing a lift to work, and either one always driving and the other paying a contribution or week on, week off. And so in theory, my neighbour and I who share lifts to school should have an exemption certificate under Article 22 from the DVA to do that, because we're pooling, in effect we're paying each other in kind. The only thing that is allowed is mere social kindness if you pick somebody up by the side of the road as a one-off in the pouring rain. So it's narrowly drawn. It has been extended towards childminders, but in the last jurisdiction. We need to look how far that will stretch, to be honest, and when does a provision of a car service by ringing up and booking somebody become a taxi service? You're quite right, that is a question we need to resolve.
We can't go out of here pretending that there's not an issue around that, because it's clear that
yes,
that is.
There is an issue. We've been working for a long time on taxis, and we're not there yet. We've been working a long time on buses, and we're not there yet. We have to pick up this third piece, which is at a much earlier stage of development. But if I'm sitting as a taxi firm charging 30p a mile to move people around, and there's a volunteer being paid 45p a mile to move people around on the same journey, why am I not getting an equal crack at that opportunity is a valid question for the taxis to ask. I absolutely agree the service is different.
Sorry if you're in Derry or Belfast or some of the towns, but there's a lot of places around the north that just don't have a taxi service, so worth talking about. And that's why these people are here, because they wouldn't be doing it if there was.
And I am conscious it's a different service. Paddy and others rightly made the point about that person can be a counsellor with a small c, as well as a driver taking somebody to a cancer appointment, whatever it is, extremely difficult times. That may be the extent of the human connection that individual living alone, widowed, whatever, has outside the doctor's consultation and being given a diagnosis and they're home with this volunteer. That is a different profession, vocation, than a taxi driver.
Will you be doing anything to give these people some comfort? And I know you've explained very well around the difficulties around the European directive, and I'd like to see the British government challenge some of that stuff. But the issue about the cars, are you going to give these people comfort that they're not going to be covered under that taxi legislation? Because I think it's you know, I think they're going to go away maybe a bit more worried than they came in if they hadn't already.
Well, we have had that discussion at length with the partnerships. It's not an issue that's new to either party. We haven't got to a stage of the policy development where I can give anybody hope or fear, and I do accept that means, picking up Ian's point, that means fear reigns until hope is clear. But we have not reached that point of development. There was a derogation given in the last mandate for childminders, is my understanding. But otherwise, we are back to this mere social kindness, and that's where the law sits at the moment, as interpreted by judicial rulings in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. So it is an issue we have to return to. In a sense, the other two issues are so much further advanced. We want to try and move on with those. I accept there are some connections, but we have this clear line of 8 to 9 seats, which distinguishes different types of transport.
Fair enough, but you know, even if these people that wanted to accept, they're going up to the higher tier, and I would say they probably don't, but they're going to be trapped on the other end by legislation that we're putting through this, unless they can be given some sort of comfort. So we'll just you've answered the question, but encourage you to do whatever you can to try and make clear in any legislation that this is a very different service than a taxi service.
And I am conscious, and talking to the partnerships, that more and more of their work is moving to smaller groups for the range of issues they outlined, transforming your care and so on, and cars are probably becoming an increasing proportion of their journeys, their work, their minibuses. I'm very conscious of that as well.
Thanks.
Okay. London Monroe.
The relief that Chair, is that most of the questions that I was going to ask have already been asked. And it was around the cars, because I think, Ian, you did say in response to Ian here, well, not dealing with cars as yet. That would seem to indicate that you're going to get there eventually. And the implications of that and the impact that will have to be wait to be seen. But, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, if it takes as long to get to that, I suspect none of the present members here will be in the Assembly by that time. So at least it'll be maybe somebody else's problem. In relation to the illegal drivers that you talk about, and I think the words that you said, that you're trying to get to a situation where the unlicensed will become more visible. So therefore, the folk, the people who are doing things straight and open and honest, they're going to pay the penalty here.
No, what we have said is, for instance, the scout groups, you will see no change. You won't have a 10B permit on your windscreen. You will have an own account licence. But we have committed you will not see, apart from the wording on that disc, you will not see a change. What we have said is we know there are illegal operators out there. We know there are operators operating at the very margins of legality as well. We know we don't have an effective enforcement regime, regulatory regime against those. We draw parallels, and I forget who it was suggested there weren't complete parallels with freight. But if we look at the freight industry, where we have illegal operators who are now having licences revoked by the transport regulator in the department on a reasonably regular basis, we now have vehicles impounded of an operator who had their licence revoked, has continued to operate. None of those tools were available in any way the same under the 67 Transport. So we are talking about the regulator being able to intervene at a much earlier stage of incorrect operating. Whilst, of course, always bearing in mind is this education to advise people how to do it right, rather than willful neglect of their duties.
Okay, Landlord.
He looked over his glasses.
Yeah.
Does that?
Well, the best answer I can give there, I've heard what has been said. But Ian, you have heard, and I don't think, I'm going to assume you don't need any convincing of the importance of the volunteer sector and the community sector in all of this. Now, they're very nervous about all of this, and I think with some justification. And I think that it must surely be possible, in the wisdom that exists within your department, to ensure that their concerns are taken on board in a real way. Now, I know it's one thing, and I'm not saying this in a spiteful way. It's one thing to say something, and then it's quite another thing to manifest it. And I am not sure that what we've heard today or what they've heard today, they'll go away from here totally relieved that this issue can be resolved to total satisfaction.
They know, and we know from engagement. We met with them in February. We met them last December. We've met them a number of times, and each time we make some progress on a number of the issues, and sometimes close off an issue and say, yes, we can see how that will now work. We're down to 2 or 3 issues. I agree with Sharon that I think we can find a pragmatic way through the fare piece. I think we can, but it is interesting the pilot case is asking explicitly about payment. The driver's piece, putting my road safety hat back on, 89 people regularly driving minibuses without a minibus test. Where does that sit in the spectrum of road safety activities? A bigger vehicle, a heavier vehicle with people on board. I must admit it, and I know I can tend to go purist on these things. I would be much more comfortable if those people sat a minibus test. I know a number of them will be very nervous about that. I recognise that. We are saying this is 3 to 4 years away. That may be some reassurance, or it may just leave their nervousness running for longer. But when one boils it down into those numbers, it becomes a manageable, tangible, manageable thing. The thing I can't make tangible and manageable is what DRD may do. I can discuss that at length with DRD colleagues, as to the partnerships at length. I can hear the different strands of DRD activity to do with integrated transport, to do with regional development programs, etc. But as I've said a number of times, I can't prove a negative. I cannot prove that DRD will not take any account of what DOE is doing. I can't prove that. It's just impossible to prove that. I have the statement that I read out at the beginning. It's a completely separate exercise, will not be influenced by the decisions of DRD. And that is being given out by DRD. It is being approved by DRD at very senior levels. But I cannot prove the negative. And it may be DRD has to act on the procurement issue because of ever-tightening EU laws in advance of us. I also know, and the partnerships know, that that way lies disaster, because they cannot take an upper-tier licence in the current licensing regime. We're very clear on that as well. So there are thickets on every path here, and that's been one of the challenges.
What number of accidents, Ian, has there been? And I'm talking here now about buses.
We are fortunate in Northern Ireland that there have been low collisions, sorry, almost led me astray there, low numbers of collisions on buses. We know of just about a year ago there was a school bus overturned around Mahara Felt. It was a special school, I think. All of the children were seat belted, there were no serious injuries. So we know how close to disaster we can come at any point in an unexpected way. We know 20 years ago a minibus crashed on the M40. All the children, many of the children were killed. And that we have not had an incident of that severity in Northern Ireland yet.
No, and I mean, and I take your point about road safety. No, only a fool would contend against that, and we're not. Right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm sorry I have to go. I'm going to this lunch to represent the committee. So the next person's Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation. Obviously, one of the issues that we discussed with the organisation earlier was the link between DRD and DOE and much discussions. So it does appear that that matter is being resolved. We did talk about, or I talked about the vicious circle that there was, but that seems to be getting resolved. Is that right? From your earlier statement from?
I think that both departments are committed to getting resolution because we're dependent on each other. It only works if we're both working together. Yeah. So in terms of commitment, yeah, we work very closely.
So it's not resolved, but it's getting there?
But I think that there's clear determination from both sides that we get to the point where...
Okay, but it's not resolved yet?
It's resolved to the extent of statements saying they are separate activities.
Yes.
But it is the same organisations talking to the two departments. I fully accept that, and therefore it creates difficulties for them. I fully accept that. But we are both committed to delivering the aims of the bus operator licensing review, which includes allowing a vibrant and innovative community transport sector to continue to flourish. DRD are members of the Bus Forum, which is chaired by DOE. So we are both committed.
Although there is a difference of opinion between the department's view and the community transport view, in that you believe that it will flourish if they're put into the top tier of the licensing, whereas they believe, certainly from what I heard, they would believe that it will not flourish. Do you accept that there is that difference of opinion?
They are concerned, I'll look at them to see if they shake their heads at this, that going into the top tier will be an extra reason that they may lose the grant funding status that they've had to date with DRD. And that is their biggest single concern around all of this. And it would be if I was them.
He's agreeing something.
They nodded. They all. Billy wasn't sure about that. The other two nodded. That is the biggest single concern. And it would be for me if I was on the board of one of those partnerships. I'm trying to deliver a service. It is absolutely vital to our community in the different parts of Northern Ireland. And actually, I could be forced to tender for that. That doesn't mean I lose it, but it means I have to go through a process of potentially losing it, having to prove myself to be the best in terms of value for money and the things that tendering requires. I believe these organisations will show themselves to be the best anyway, because they have shown a damn good job at doing what they're doing, but I can't give them any comfort of what would come out of the other end of a tendering process. They have that concern which I cannot allay. It is not humanly possible for me to allay that concern. I can get statements from DRD that these things are all connected. They can have conversations with DRD. I can have conversations with DRD. DRD may actually have a firm intent not to tender, but advice around procurement rules or changing to wording of European procurement rules may pull the carpet from under DRD as well. And if it does at the moment, there's nowhere for the partnerships to go. That is one thing we do collectively know. So that raises their fear. It raises, in a sense, an imperative to get on with this review. But we still have this small number of difficult, unresolved issues. So the vicious circle is still vicious.
Okay. And as yet you haven't found a way out or around those issues?
One option the partnerships have put forward is that they are put in the lower tier until or unless DRD tenders. Then they would have to relinquish their lower tier licence and get an upper tier licence. They may in the meantime choose to put their public firms in upper tier. That there is a question of how much freedom and flexibility we could give them in the lower tier with its derogations from EU law. That's still a question. There is also a question, if they did all that work on a lower tier licence, but then their upper tier licence company bid for the work, they couldn't quote any of their experience from the lower tier company because it's a separate legal entity. So they wouldn't be able to use all their experience delivering community transport services in the tender to continue to deliver community transport services. By law, different entity They cannot read that across. So even that option isn't straightforward.
Huge amount of questions yet are still unanswered.
There are many questions answered as well. Inevitably, these hearings focus on the unanswered questions. We have, and the partnerships, and I've said before, transport managers, repute, financial standing, operating centres, environmental considerations.
Sorry?
All of that is straightforward.
Tom, are you moving on to a different question?
I am, yes.
Would you mind at the stage if colleagues want to come in with much?
It's just
Okay,
very
sorry, yes.
briefly, Tom. Sorry, there's clearly a lot of things that we can answer and a lot that we can't. Some of the people that could answer would be very well-paid barristers who understand European law very well. We don't have a lot of them around, but some of the people that could answer some of these questions would be DRD officials. Is it in order that this committee could ask them to come here? Because I have questions I want to ask them, and this is within our purview, I think. So could we do that?
And I do think there was talk about horrendous costs of barristers, with due deference to Mr McGuinness and indeed Mr Weir. I do think this is the sort of thing that many barristers would do pro bono for charitable organisations such as partnerships. I run a charity myself. I've seen that sort of thing happen.
Statement there. One that was front.
Sure, that leads me on to my next point.
Anything to do over the weekend, no?
That leads me on to my next point. In the written presentation, you did indicate, Ian, that DSO advice has indicated that there is a degree of commerciality to the functioning of the partnerships and suggests that they should be placed within the full licence. I think it's just 3 weeks ago here, Chair, that we had other Department of Environment officials who had got conflicting legal advice on certain issues, and it meant them changing, or the resulting factor was they had to change large sections of a bill. Now, that came at a very late stage. Wondering if you have any intention of getting other advice which may be conflicting. As to me, the department are good at getting advice, legal advice, and they get a couple of different advice until they get the advice they want.
I don't have an intention to go and get conflicting advice. I can reassure you of that, Tom. In terms, we took legal advice. But we are policy officials. We've read the legislation ourselves. We have legislation staff in DOE. And the challenge we have is exclusively non-commercial. That means you cannot have the tiniest bit of commercial activity. Add to that now this European judgment about what non-commercial means in the transport sector, and it means must be interpreted as covering the carriage of goods or people by a private individual for his own purposes, purely as part of his hobby. That since we took that legal advice, I think it reinforces where that legal advice was sitting. We will be talking urgently, and are talking urgently with DFT, who will be taking their own legal advice. So in that sense, we are getting a second bite at that.
We see that, Judge.
I'm certainly happy, or it's judgment C/317/12, and that's publicly available on the internet.
Yeah, it is quite interesting because obviously, you know, how the commercial activities are defined. But anyway, that's an issue for people beyond us, I think. Chair, in fairness, one final question, Chair. The community transport people said something like the department is softening somewhat towards their views since the end of last year. Would you accept that?
I would accept that we have engaged closely with them, and we've tried very much to reconcile what they are saying with where the straw man sits. We've tried very hard not to introduce a third tier again for the reasons I've given, that we could find extremely little difference between the third tier we introduced and the top tier. And the more tiers you have, the more complex it gets, both to draft the legislation but then to operate on the ground. We identified a number of possible ways through, and I mentioned one, that they go in the lower tier until or unless any tendering happens, then move up. But I've identified for you a number of drawbacks to that as well. So it's not for want on both sides for ingenuity to see how we may do this, but we haven't found a trouble-free route through this yet. I think that's fair to say. But it's not for want of trying on all parts, I assure you of that.
Okay. Maybe we'll not call it softening, Chair. We'll just say it's trying to be pragmatic. Thank you.
Indeed.
Thanks for it.
Barry?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just a brief question. Can you offer an explanation as to why the pace of change is slower in England in relation to this area?
I think talking to officials in DFT, they recognise with the state aid challenges and a variety of other stuff going on, this is an area that needs to be moved. I think it's also fair to say, and you'll recognise it from the broad political statements by UK politicians, the big society and those items pushed towards are very much in the space of community transport. I think that's probably a tension within Westminster and Whitehall. But
a lot of tension around that.
The more statements that come through like these court judgments, the more difficult it will become, I think, for any of us to cope with the amount of tension that these different things are creating. Yes, they're a bit behind, watching with interest. We were behind on the goods vehicle operation. Sometimes it's just about you can only do a certain number of things at once and you can't move on everything at once. Therefore, one of the advantages of devolution is different jurisdictions can take things at a different pace. They are working off 1980s legislation on buses. We're working off 1967. So in a sense, therefore, we have 20 more years. We have 20 years of catching up to do before we reach where they are. Of course, we won't just do 20. We'll do 50 years of catching up. Then they're behind us, and that's just a natural way of these things.
Okay. Any other members, any further questions? I think it's had quite an airing. No, and with that, can I thank Ian Greenway and Sharon Clements very much for their attendance here today. I think we may have ended up with many more questions than we have answers, but I do appreciate your time and appreciate the fact that you have been liaising closely with
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, members, well, obviously that was quite a lengthy briefing. Are there any further comments or any suggestions about where we want to go from here, other than possibly asking the department for a timescale of events to come?
I don't know if they know even the timescale with 3 to 4 years. But I think it's obviously concerned, Chair, that they did let it slip. The car drivers, the volunteers who use their cars, are likely to be caught up in some other piece of legislation. So it may be useful if we can ask them to provide us with, something around that, because I'm concerned that something like this is going to land on us someday, and we're going to be asked to agree it and not realise the impact that's going to have on the volunteer sector who do an excellent job providing that service. But I don't know. I have a lot of concerns over what they're saying, and I think that their mind's made up. Excuse me, in respect of what they intend to do. It's just how they do it and how long it takes them to get there. So.
Okay, Cathal.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Chair, I have serious reservation because we've heard all this before. I'm not arguing the case with licensing or road safety or any issues, and we would support all that. But in terms of delivering service for communities like gas, there's no scope whatsoever mentioned there. And I know dealing with the DRD in the past, it's the same thing with officials, and we'll have to at some point get all the officials. And I do welcome the suggestion that DRD officials should come up. But there is one question I'd like to ask. In terms of legal opinion on all of this here, because we're introducing here or supporting European legislation coming through, we're getting one legal opinion, we don't know what another. Can we ask in terms of how we as a committee or get some steer in relation to all of that there, so you can get some legal response? I mean, because as Alban knows himself, there's different opinions out there, and they're going on the premise that there's a test case here, there's legal opinion, and they have to do this. Now, you know, there's no point if we're going to just follow through all the time. Like, we're here to try and support communities and try and bring forward legislation that will support communities in some ways, you know. And there seems to be, if this is introduced, the volunteer car service is totally gone. And I'm not arguing with the need this should be fit for purpose or on the road fit for roads. I'm not arguing that case. It's a very, very difficult one, and it's gone on for 6 years. So I just need to try and maybe we'll get some legal advice and see and ask some questions and get the DRD official.
But Chair, you know, and I haven't much contrary to say to that. When we get our opinion, it'll be one person's opinion too.
Well,
So,
no, I agree. I mean, at least it's a challenge
that's the
then in
world
that
we live
respect.
in.
Okay, well, are we happy, members, to go ahead and ask for another legal opinion? Oh, well, a legal opinion.
Yeah, but is it? Yeah, I have a wee slight problem with it. Not a big problem. Us going now to get legal opinion on something that we don't know the shape, size, or colour of, does that not present problems? Is it not? You know, whenever there's a better shape on all of this, would that not be the time that you go to a barrister and say, look, hold on, I've got this here and I want to ask you some questions around it?
Ian Greenway gave us the name and number of the judgment, the European judgment this is all based on. We could ask the legal services here to provide a wee bit of clarification on that specific judgment.
That's fair. I mean, it's fair enough. Yeah.
Would that do?
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead with the volunteer drive? Just a comment by Ian?
Oh, I had to get more information. Yeah, sorry, and you wanted to get more information then on the volunteer drivers?
The volunteers, use of their own cars, and if that, what plans they have. There's been discussing it with the community transport sector, so they're aware of it. So it'd be helpful if they could maybe tell us.
Okay, we'll get that information then from the department. Okay, members. So if we're done with this, then we'll move on to the next part of our agenda, which is the correspondence. Correspondence cover note with suggested actions at page 126. And at 12.2 we have correspondence from Dalradian Gold Mine planning application at page 129. Members have to ask you how you wish to proceed with this. The correspondent has requested an opportunity to brief the committee, but you may wish to refer this letter to the department for comment initially, bearing in mind the committee's position on individual planning applications.
Chair, when you read that, you may have thought that the letter writer was from Dalradian Gold. Probably couldn't be further from the truth. As an opponent of Dalradian Gold, it's a very vexed issue in that area. You know, you can imagine if it was in your own constituency, for a gold mine, against a gold mine. It's very, very divisive. So I was just taking note there of, to date in that community, what I'm aware of the fact that there are people against the gold mine. Dalradian Gold they're operating on the basis of a plan and approval. Isn't that right, for a tunnel, an exploratory tunnel? And Omagh District Council has taken some position or other. Forum is the umbrella for rural community groups in that area. The department have been written to by ourselves. Anna, on our behalf, as chair, wrote to the department. I don't think we've ever received a response. Is that?
No.
Is that?
I haven't got it yet. No.
I mean, this is several weeks in the system.
It was only about 2 weeks ago, I think. Maybe.
And is that normal? Is it normal to take 2 or 3 weeks for a response to the committee?
10 working days the department has to respond.
And there are supporters of the mine in that community. So Cormac McAleer, who may be known to many of us,
6 months.
he's obviously seeking a meeting with the committee or to discuss his concerns as somebody who's very environmentally opposed to it. So
Okay. Would you be happy? Yeah. Would you be happy at this stage if we forward this letter and then ask for response to both.
Yeah.
At the stage, see what
I
take
think
it
it
from
will
there.
come to the stage where we may listen to
Yeah.
various players on this.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I think we will be hearing from, you know, we will be hearing from Cormac McLear and other opponents of the mine, and then we may wish to give an opportunity to Dal Radian or whoever to put the alternative case.
Well, Chair, I mean, in the first instance, we have to find out what the attitude of the department is, a bit of the history in terms of the technicalities and so forth, and then we could invite Mr. McAleer or anybody else to come along.
Support that, yeah.
Okay.
If we're not satisfied with the response from the department.
Okay.
Agreed.
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, just on that point, I know the Chair sometimes holds meeting that other members are entitled to attend, more informal meetings.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, even this stage, would that be appropriate?
Yeah. But let's
Probably
find
need the
out
written
first of
response.
all.
Okay, yeah, that's all right.
First.
Happy to go with that.
Then we'll look at whether we do it informally or formally. Okay, so we'll go on to 12.3, which is departmental reply regarding concerns raised by Castlereagh Borough Council regarding delays in processing a planning application at Lower Carrow Road in Dundonald at page 131. Are members content to forward a copy of the reply to Castlereagh Borough Council?
Agreed.
Okay. 12.4, correspondence from a church group on compliance with new proposals for minibus brake test frequency and weight restriction at page 134. Are members content to forward to the department for comment?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay, and then on to 12.5, departmental reply in response to concerns expressed by CCNC on the siting of slurry stores at page 135. Are members content to forward a copy of the reply to the original correspondent?
Agreed.
Okay, so on to 12.6, report from the British Retail Consortium, A Better Retailing Climate at page 138. Members, do you wish to receive a briefing on the report at a future meeting? Is that okay? Okay. Thank you. And at 12.7, correspondence from Donegal Truckers on the road user levy at page 211. Members, are you content to forward to the department for comment?
Agreed.
Chair, I think it could be read in association with maybe 12.14 there. I see John O'Mahony, who's the chair of an Oireachtas Committee on Transport, has written to Jimmy Spratt as chair of the Regional Development Committee, isn't that right? And then it's passed to us. It's the same subject, you know.
Same subject.
I wonder what is the current state of play? Because if you recall, officials came before us and said they would be coming back to us before the 1st of April enforcement or implementation of this. Now, we never heard a dicky board since that from the department. So, as a matter of urgency, could we find out the current state of play? Is the levy in place? 1st of April has come and gone, and you know, was it a necessary part of the procedure for DOE officials to seek our legislative consent? Was that merely a courtesy? But try to get to the bottom of that.
Chair, as I understand, something comes before this committee in relation to this levy. Is that not correct? If not correct, then
I'm not sure that it does come. The Minister's considering it. I would have expected of courtesy that he would tell us what he's doing.
it's only a matter of courtesy rather than
Well, it's
procedure.
UK-wide legislation.
Yeah.
I don't know
So,
that,
so
that
we
he-
don't have to enact anything here. The Westminster.
It was my understanding that we didn't know that
Yeah.
it was at Westminster, but there was an exemption for the border areas of Northern Ireland, but that there was no specific legislation to be enacted here.
But the point, Chair, is this that that exemption could be extended to include, I presume, the A5, which is mentioned here, because that's the link road through Northern Ireland into the Republic, as far as the Donegal hauliers are concerned. Now, that exemption, as I understand it, was not included in the original matters that were presented to the committee, but that exemption could still be obtained if the minister at Westminster was minded to grant that exemption.
Yes,
I think that's really where we have to focus.
Yeah.
if we could get information on that, that would be important.
Well, Chair, oh, sorry, go ahead, Judge.
No, Chair, but there's another issue here because it was up to the department to bring something forward in relation to the charging element of this here, which was supposed to be introduced. We never seen how that was going to go about. Where because that's what was the next phase of it.
Where the DVA would become
The DVA, yeah, where the department was involved in how this here, the whole charging this is implemented.
That's
here.
right, yes.
So we
there
haven't.
is.
Funny enough, was Ian, I think it was Ian Greenwood doing it, wasn't it? It has to
No,
come
it
back.
wasn't Ian Greenway, it was two others.
Wasn't Ian Greenwood? No.
No, it was two other people came.
Right. So I mean, that we haven't heard that element of.
Yeah.
I think that would probably, I think the original, the basic legislation would have to go through that subordinate legislation, the charging. So we'd have to put in place the basis for who's to be charged and how that works before they actually put in place information about charges.
But it was to be introduced by the 1st of April.
It was, yes, that's correct.
I haven't seen the
haven't heard
charging
anything
element.
about it, yeah.
It might be unenforceable unless we
Didn't.
deal with that
I
aspect.
haven't seen that, have you? Yeah, okay.
I haven't seen anything.
The truckers concerned met with, they're one of the lobby groups, they met with the minister informally, and they were making an appeal to the minister not to proceed with it.
But with respect, I mean, there's nothing the minister can do. There's nothing that this committee can do, as far as I can see, anyway. If it's Westminster responsibility, the only thing we can do is lobby on behalf of the hauliers and say, look, extend the exemption so that people who are using Northern Ireland roads going into the Republic, from the Republic and into the Republic, they be exempted from this charge. And that would ease their problem. That's the only thing we can do, as far as I can see.
Okay, Tom, were you wanting to come in?
No. Oh, sorry, I did. Apologies for that. Yes. My query was around the exemptions that Mr McGuinness talked about, especially in respect of the A5. But my recollection of that day was that they basically said, look, the exemptions are the couple of roads in Cavan and I think it was it Armagh, Monaghan, maybe?
Yeah.
There was no indication at all that they were minded to extend that. Because I remember I certainly asked them the question, as did others, but they were not minded at all.
No, I think that's right.
But all I'm saying, Chair, is that that's the only thing we can do is to lobby for that exemption to be extended, to include the A5 or whatever road they're looking for. I'm not I'm not saying that we would be successful in doing that, but I think that is the only thing that we can do.
The truckers are looking for much more than that.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
And reasonably so, because and people can argue here that it won't affect our economy in the north. It will. If people will be discouraged from doing business in Cookstown, they'll be discouraged, which isn't off the A5. People going to Newton Stewart, all these different places that they say they go to on a daily basis, for supplies, deliveries, and if you're listening closely to the truckers, they're looking for much more than an exemption of a single road. They're looking for a different arrangement for the island of Ireland, basically. I think they accept or understand that when you reach the island of Britain, that you may be into a levy paying situation, but north-south trade.
Your argument's gone downhill, Barry.
No, but it's not, because your understanding of Britain is that it's an island, I'm sure, it's the same as your UK understanding might be different. But I would imagine geographically and politically, the description of England, Scotland, Wales is Britain. And this is the point they're making now. They're emphasising again that they're not political, political people. Some of the way it's worded, it's clear that they're not. But I did attend with others a meeting in Letterkenny where there was at least 150 people, hauliers, who were saying this is having a grave effect on their whole business. And the idea of north-south trade being affected, it's like erecting a barrier when we should be in the business of removing barriers till cross-border trade.
Okay, well, we'll follow up with the department on these issues. I'm just mindful of the time, members. I'm sure you've all got all the commitments as well. So,
Chair, I need some clarity because
Justice Oates.
just through you, Chair. I mean, we're just after getting email here in relation to somebody who already has paid the levy. So we need to check this out to see exactly what's going on there in the Newry Belfast road. So,
But they said something about.
yeah.
We had a driver stopped today by DVA between Newry and Belfast. DVA officer seemed surprised when he found out levy had been paid.
So this question has to be asked the department.
I mean, my understanding was you could pay the levy on a daily basis.
that's right.
No, I
You could pay
we
for a
understand-
year.
No, we understand that part, but I
Yeah.
mean, the department officials was to come back to us, and it hasn't. They haven't come back.
Oh yes, no, I understand that, and
Okay.
it should.
Well, we'll seek answers
We'll
to
get
those
an update and
questions.
see what the
Yeah.
actual position is, because the Act was to come into effect from the 1st of April, which presumably it didn't. But I thought we were to get subordinate legislation to bring the charges in here, but I may be mistaken in that. We'll get an update on what's happening then exactly.
Okay, we'll get that update. But for now, we'll move on, members.
Urgently as well.
What's that?
Just get urgently as well.
Yes, we'll ask. Yeah, we'll ask for that information urgently. Okay, members, move on to 12.8. Departmental reply regarding concerns raised by Carn Valley residents. That's at page 215. Members, are you content to forward a copy of the reply to the original correspondence?
Content.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
And
please, yeah.
12.9, correspondence regarding opposition to proposed quarry in Lisburn, at page 217. Members, are you content to forward a copy to the department
Content.
for their comment? Thank you. 12.10, progress report on Department of Environment's capital projects, March 2014, page 218. Members, are you content to ask the department for an update on funding allocated to the North West Region Waste Management Group procurement exercise?
Content.
Okay. And 12.11, memo from Regional Development Committee regarding inquiry into benefits of cycling at page 222. Members, are you content for the Secretariat to draft a response to this?
Content.
Thank you. And members, are you content to note items 12.12 to 12.19 at pages 228 to 290?
Content.
Okay.
Just on 213, would it be a good idea to write to Mr McMullen to say that the upcoming inquiry affords him an opportunity to make all these points?
McMullen has
think he's
made
well
his
aware.
points at great length to the inquiry already.
But I wonder, should we offer him the opportunity in person to hear from him and to confine him till a 45-minute or half-hour presentation? You know, that's the understanding you would enter into.
He has already briefed the committee
Aye.
last June,
It's okay.
and I think he sent us either 14 or 16
That's a nice way of saying no.
suggestions. No, I mean, it's entirely up to you. We'll put it.
Maybe when the year expires. Maybe then.
12, 13.
I think the whole wind inquiry is to be dealt with at a later date, and what way we're going to proceed with it. So we'll come back to that in time. So on to 13, which is the forward work programme, members. 292.
Yeah.
Members, you can have any comments on the work programme? Are you content to note? With no other comments, then we're on to any other business. Members, anything they must wish to raise?
Thank you.
And if not, the 1 to 15 date and time, place the next meeting, which is of course next Thursday, 10th of April, 10 a.m. in the Senate chamber. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Chair, excellent.
Your fair is fair.